What's up, guys? It's Blue TTCG back with another Vanguard deck profile, this time for Gira format. And yes, you heard me right, Gira format. The deck I'm about to show you guys is a deck that I took to a remote Gira tournament run by Project G-Boot. If you guys aren't familiar with Project G-Boot, they are a Discord community that run monthly Vanguard tournaments for the best era of Vanguard in order to relive the moments and the awesome decks that were available at the time. And for me personally, this was my first time joining one of their monthly tournaments. But I'm proud to say that I finished in second place with this Luard build, and I do want to go into this build in as much depth as I can, because I feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff that I experimented with and things that I didn't expect to work out, but worked out really effectively considering the amount of time I had to test this deck, which was, I'm gonna be honest, guys, I didn't test this deck for that long, so I had to throw things together in a jiff because of all the tournaments and formats and decks I'm experimenting with lately. But yeah, before I go into the deck, guys, I do want to point out a couple of things. So in terms of what this video will cover itself, we're going to talk about the deck. Then next up, we're going to talk about the cards that I will probably consider putting in the deck for future builds, and cards I think can be run safely, but cards that I wouldn't necessarily run personally. And then 3, we'll go over the actual tournament log, we'll do a report on how the matches went and my overall thoughts on how this deck did in each matchups that I encountered. And then finally, I want to give a story as well. This is not the last thing I'll do, but I do want to give a story with how I came up with this deck towards the end of the deck profile. So if you guys make it that far, look forward to those. I really hope you guys watch through to the end of the video. But before we get right into the deck, I do want to also point out this. If you guys haven't already watched my 2 deck profiles that I did for Luard in the past, I did one in April and another one in August for standard tempo control-ish Luard build. For the former, and the latter was a Morfessa turbo build, which kind of matches the speed and aggression that we have in the current premium metagame. A lot of what you see in this deck right here is going to be similar to thoughts and ideas that I have in premium currently, so it's kind of reflective of my current Vanguard mindset and a lot of the knowledge and skills I've gained that I wouldn't necessarily have had 4 years ago, back when Gira was still active. But yeah, guys, feel free to check those deck profiles out. It'll give you a lot better of a context as well on this deck. The link for those will be in the description. But with those all out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into the deck profile. So we're going to start with the starter, as we always do, the grade 0s and trigger units. We're going to start with Dragwizard Vicreau. So Dragwizard Vicreau is, far and above being basically the best starter we have available for Shadow Paladins in Gira, especially for Luard. The thing about Luard is that your ritual is not the goal. The goal of ritual with this deck build is not getting ritual 10 like it might be for Morfessa and premium. The thing about Gira or Luard is that you're just trying to get grade 1s in the drop zone enough to basically turn on your best ritual skills, such as Dragstrider, which is your finisher, as well as Dragabyss, which is a ritual X for every 4 grade 1s in your drop zone. So cards like that are your most powerful rituals available, and those are the main reasons why we want grade 1s in the drop. But Vicreau still is extremely important for managing our resources. It gives you both a counter charge and effectively a soul charge if you have ritual 3 when it's retired by the effect or cost of your card with ritual ability. So very important to still have this, and we're running it as a starter for this Gira deck because you want to have it access to it as soon as possible. The nice thing about this card is that it actually does not require you to have any generation break, which means that if we're able to retire for whatever reason any of our cards for the cost of our card, that means we're able to refund the resource basically as soon as possible. And the other nice thing about running this Vicreau and having it as a starter is that as soon as we use it, it'll be either in the soul or eventually soul blasted out and it goes to the drop zone. We can return it back to the deck with one of our grade 3 Luards, the stride bonus Luards. They're both able to return normal units back to the deck in order to go into your stride, and usually this is your pick of choice because you want to keep recycling this in order to get those resources refunded over and over again. So card's still amazing, and the fact that we have access to it right from the beginning of the game is probably the most essential part to the success of this deck. Alright, and then for the trigger units, we first got 4 copies of Belial Owl. So Belial Owl is the MVP of the trigger lineup. There's a lot of MVPs really, but this is one of the main MVPs, I would definitely say. The thing about Belial Owl that's really important and that's really saved me in a lot of the matches that I ran into throughout the G tournament is that this card goes back to the deck at the end of your turn. It goes to the bottom specifically if you're at Generation Break 1 and you have Ritual 3, which are both incredibly easy to fulfill after your first stride, so there's no issue there. But the fact that this keeps going to the bottom again and again means that eventually, after you've cycled through your deck enough times, which we're able to do so quickly, so efficiently with this build, trust me guys, this build is really like almost autonomous in the way it cycles through the deck and compresses the deck. And this card allows you to do that because it is one of the few cards that goes to the bottom by itself. Not only that, but because it's able to go to the bottom by itself, that means anytime you drive check this or draw it again, you're able to use it as a 10k shield, or you're able to call it down again and retire it as retire fodder, and then it goes back to the bottom of the deck again. So one of the most important aspects of this card for me throughout my tournament run was that I was able to use this as my most important 10k shield, because I'm going to just precursor this right now. I am not running any other 10k shields in this deck other than heal triggers. So this 10k shield is the most valuable, and I basically always wanted to make sure to guard with it when I could in order to get it back to the drop zone, get it back in the deck. That way when I drive check again, I can threaten the possibility of this crit, because that critical is insane. This is what makes the card so good. And then of course the ability to, when it's retired by the effect or cost of your card with Luard in its name, draw a card. The thing is that draw card is not optional, so do be careful about that. But that's also been helping out for me in terms of retaining my card advantage, because sometimes this deck has trouble with getting some cards in the field in general in order to retire for anything. So having that ability to basically regain your card advantage, I think, is really valuable and has helped me out a lot. But the bottom deck skill is definitely the most valuable skill among this whole trigger lineup, I think. So 100% I'd say run for this crit, especially in Jira where it's of extreme value. And again, my favorite trigger in this entire deck. We need the pressure, we need the recursion, and we need the card economy salvation, basically. So that's Belial Owl. And then for the next part of our triggers, this is very, very non-standard. I don't think any of you guys will expect this, but in my opinion, this is the star part of the trigger lineup for this deck. We've got 4 copies of Howl Owl as a draw trigger, and 4 copies of Dragwizard Bab as also a draw trigger. And these two combine to create 8 draws for our trigger lineup. These 8 draws are not being run necessarily because they're draws, although yes, this build wants the draws. But the main reason why part of the main reason that I'm running them is that they both have the effect to, on the Rigard Circle, you activate the ability, put it into your soul, and choose one of your units to get plus 3k power until end of turn. The most important part about that skill is putting this into the soul. The thing about this build of Luard, guys, is that we go through soul so fast, and we're not able to really recover soul as easily, even with cards such as Vicreau as our starter, and also some of the grade 3s that we're running in order to ride on top of. Those simply aren't enough in order to, those aren't enough in order to recover our soul every turn. And we have plenty of cards that use soul, such as Midir, which you'll see in the grade 1 lineup. You'll see Dragabyss Luard in the G zone, and those cards use our soul very quickly as well. So we want to be able to recover them at will, basically on command. If we at any point need the soul, this is available at will, basically whenever we see these in our hand. But because we're running 8 copies of them, extremely likely to see these in our hand time and time again. And you don't have to bring one of these down from your hand in order to put into your soul and get plus 3. It's really, the choice is up to you. It's not like you have to call each of these that are in your hand. But anytime I was finding that, okay, I need soul for this next defensive turn, or I need soul for my follow-up offense turn, so let me just prepare beforehand. Let me call down this Dragwizard Bad, or let me call down this Howl Owl to get myself the extra soul for that turn, ahead of time, so that I'm not trying to, fumble my cards and be like, oh, I don't have enough soul for this play, man, I can't do that anymore. I want to be able to have that access to that soul in the future, basically ahead of time, and I feel like these draw triggers do a great job of doing that. There's not a lot of triggers that are able to accomplish this like these exact 2, Howl Owl and Dragwizard Bat. Now the nice thing about these triggers is that they are draw triggers, and this deck is a control grind build. This is not any like standard Luard build you'll ever see anywhere on the internet. I trust me, guys, you will not see this kind of grindy, control forever, recur everything Luard build anywhere on the internet. The thing about these draw triggers is that it helps keep up your card advantage while also making sure that you don't have triggers that kind of, clutter your deck. Like Cursed Raven, although it's great that it goes back to the deck, but the problem is you're not able to see as often as you'd like some other cards that you'd prefer to have in your deck, such as maybe a couple of grade 1s that you want to eventually call back into off of like Dragabyss later in the game, or this critical trigger itself, guys. This critical trigger is really what you want to be drive checking. Now, stand triggers obviously do have some merit, and we'll go over that towards the end of the video where we talk about some alternate card choices and, potential things that could have done for this build for the tournament. But these draw triggers are the most important part about being able to play a fantastic grind game that this deck was able to do. And of course, this was a major reason why I feel like this deck was able to get the second place finish, especially in the matchups I did encounter, which I will go over at the end of this video as well. So that's going to do it for those draw triggers. And if you guys feel like this needs to be talked about a little more, or feel like it needs to be explained a little more, I'll go over those towards the end, because we'll be talking about these triggers again, I assure you. And then to finalize the grade 0 lineup and trigger units, we've got 4 copies of Allyl. This is just the generic bind heal trigger. If you guys aren't familiar with G-Era, these bind heal triggers were basically all printed in GBT14, which is the final main set of G-Era back when that was still active. And all of these bind triggers basically read, if you discard this card as cost for your G-Guardian, if you have another heal trigger in your drop zone, you can bind itself and that heal trigger in order to either 1, countercharge, or 2, soul charge. And you get to soul charge or countercharge 1 card. So this allows you to basically refund the resource that you need more pressingly at that time. This flexibility is provided to every clan, so there's nothing special about having this particular Allyl for Shadow Paladin. But the nice thing about Allyl for Shadow Paladin specifically is that we love both countercharge and soul charge. So there are some instances where I preferred the countercharge because maybe I had all face down damage, for example, and I just needed that one face up damage in order to go into my stride bonus, go into Midir, and then facilitate the rest of my plays from there. Or I just needed 1 card in soul in order to get that Dragabyss active and proceed to kill my opponent off of that. So it's nice to have that flexibility on our heal trigger. And that also means that we're doing a little more than just discarding a G-Guardian. Because I'm going to be honest, guys, the G-Guardians in this deck are not super interesting. They're pretty basic, but they get the job done, mind you. They get the job done. There's nothing wrong with them necessarily. But they're not too flashy or exciting as some other clans have in G-Era at this time. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, Shadow Paladin has fantastic G-Guardians. It's just that they're not super flashy. But having the ability to get that extra effect when you have 2 heal triggers that are, in somewhere, like, you discarded the 1 and then there's already another one in your drop zone, means that you're able to get some, resources refunded occasionally. So, very nice to have and very important when it does come up. So, you do want to be running these bind heal triggers that basically every deck in G-Era is going to be running anyway. So guys, that's all for the trigger lineup. Let's go into the grade 1s. The first card in the grade 1 lineup should be no surprise if you guys are familiar with Shadow Paladin has access to in G-Era. And even if you're not, this card should probably look familiar regardless. This card is Dragsaver Esras, which is our PG. The thing about PGs in G-Era is that they generally don't allow you to PG when they're called from anywhere to the Guardian Circle, which is not really like something that's a huge factor for the most part anyway, because there are very few cards that actually can call to the Guardian Circle from a place other than hand. But it's still noteworthy because a lot of the PGs specify one place from hand. Not only that, but a lot of them also say choose your Vanguard. A lot of the PGs nowadays say choose one of your units, and that unit cannot be hit until end of battle. However, Esras is one of the special ones, and she says choose one of your Vanguards that's being attacked, and that unit cannot be hit until end of battle. The reason why she says that specifically is because the second effect is so broken among all the PGs that exist in G-Era that, she had to be a little weaker in that regard for the actual PG effect itself. The second effect that I'm talking about that's super strong and really just one of the best PGs in all of G-Era, it is an activated ability from the drop zone. We must have Generation Break 1 and Ritual 3. We choose one of our rear guards and retire it, and we choose another copy of Esras in our drop zone and bottom deck it. And then we add this copy of Esras to our hand. Simply insane for grind game. Like, this is really quite literally the main reason why this deck is able to win and grind games so well, and what really helped me out in my tournament run as well. The fact that we just need another copy in our drop zone means that I often like riding into this, and later soul blast it out on my first stride. And that way, if I happen to, this is actually the best play to do in my opinion. So let's say you have an Esras in your opening hand, you would ride this, so it's in your soul for future turns after you ride upon it. And then afterwards, when you do your first stride, let's say you have Dragfall as your Vanguard, right? you do Dragfall stride bonus, call Vicreau or something like that, and then you'd use Dragabyss, because Dragabyss is usually your first stride in this deck. Sometimes, it's not all the time. We'll go over that though. You stride into Dragabyss, use Dragabyss skill, Soul Blast, retire Vicreau. Make sure that you Soul Blast Esras though. And off of Dragabyss, you can call an Esras from your deck, okay, let me phrase this differently, because I feel like this is a little confusing for people that are not too familiar with what these cards do. So we'll ride the Esras still, right? Let's say we rode the Esras, and in a future turn, it's going to be in your soul. And then when you go into your stride turn, forget about whether it's Dragfall or Dragheart for a second. Let's say off of your stride bonus, you call Esras from deck. And then when you stride, you're going to choose Dragabyss as the card you stride into. Now, Dragabyss requires itself to Soul Blast, flip a copy of itself, and choose one of your rear guards to retire. And we'll get to that skill, of course, when we get to the G zone. But the card you're going to retire here is that Esras that you called off of the stride bonus, and then you're able to call 2 more grade 1s, which you can do whatever you like, and that way you have 2 Esras in your drop zone now, and you could easily add one of those back to your hand, because you retired the one that you call off the stride bonus, and then the one that you had in soul from the very beginning of the game is soul blasted out, so that way you have that second copy of Esras for the skill to be activated basically right away. So of course you do have to have Ritual 3 for that, but the fact that we're able to basically search a PG right away and also get one back into the deck means that we'll have that extra PG in our deck for later in the game when we very much need it, and also we're guaranteed to have a PG in our hand for our opponent's early stride plays. Now of course you might be wondering, like, why would we ever ride the Esras when we could just simply keep it in our hand and ride some other grade 1? Well, the thing about it is that sometimes you don't have another grade 1 in your hand, which is not too unusual, but also sometimes you want to give yourself more flexibility in terms of giving your opponent damage. Giving your opponent some damage in Jira is a huge deal. Early game, people tend to take a lot of damage, and it's because the most powerful strides in the game in Jira require quite a few counterblasts. Some of them even require 2 counterblasts. So giving your opponent additional damage early on might not be desirable. So it's important to have the 6k Vanguard to start off with, especially if you're going second. That way you have some flexibility in terms of whether you can swing under your opponent with the 6k into their 7k, which is what most grade 1s have as base power in Jira. Or you can decide to boost your Esras with Vicreau and still hit over their Vanguard if you want, because maybe the damage, giving them the first damage, doesn't really matter. So that kind of flexibility does make a difference in my opinion. And of course, if you feel like you'd still give them the damage either way, then you can just ride another card if it's not really any different necessarily. But it's nice to have this play available from the very beginning of your write-ups. But yeah, she is one of the best PGs in the whole format. So it's very important to be running her. And I know some of you in some previous videos, I'm not sure if you were joking or not, but you had mentioned, like, why would you run Karma Collector in Premium as opposed to this? Well, the thing is, Premium is so much faster than Jira right now, especially in the current format. And I feel like having the Esras, you don't really get that much value as you would in Jira, where you have the potential for the game to go to the 6 stride, to GB8 stride and all of that. And having this over the long game is extremely important in terms of the value and the sheer amount of cards you save from your hand, because you're able to just PG a high power attack. And Karma Collector doesn't really have as much value in Jira because we have enough counter charge, I feel like, among the cards that we're running, and we're not trying to use Ildona counterblast, retire, draw 2. We're not running a lot of main deck counterblasts in the first place, so we don't really need to turbo the counter charges like we would with Karma Collector and Premium. So that's why we're running Esras, of course, in this build. And of course she has Ritual, which is actually the most important part. The Ritual ability is what we're really looking for our grade 1s. And you'll see here that we're actually running all Ritual grade 1s. The next card is Fuamnach, which is basically the best grade 1 in the deck. She is so versatile. She allows you to get your Ritual early on into the game by her first ability being an activated ability from the hand. You would discard her from your hand, and you would rest one of your rear guards with the Ritual ability, and then you draw a card. So not only does it give you that cycling, but also allows you to get that grade 1 in the drops in early, which is important because you want to be able to have something like Dragheart's Ritual 3 online for the free strides, or you want to have Dragfall's Ritual X ability with 4 grade 1s so that you can just stride for free from the very beginning of the game. Of course, it's not uncommon, it's not unusual at all to not have those requisite grade 1s in the drop zone, but this very much helps with that. So important to have that ability available. But the most important part of the ability perhaps is that second ability to make her a beat stick and give her resist. That resist part is probably the most important part, to be honest, but it reads specifically Generation Break 2 and Ritual 5. If you have a grade 4 Vanguard with Luard in its name, it gets plus 7k and resist. So this becomes your beat stick of choice, as well as your best attacker, because that resist ability gets around those pesky G Guardians such as Denial Griffin and even Gear Chronicles Denial Griffin equivalent, as well as some more niche G Guardians that perhaps still choose one of your units to do something with, such as Nubatama as a G Guardian that actually chooses one of the opponent's rear guards and moves it to their Guardian Circle. So if they were able to choose Fuamnach, that would be very dangerous. That'd be very scary. But thankfully, Fuamnach has resist when you fulfill the conditions it says. So very, very non-trivial to have that resist ability, which means, you know, it's going to be your main booster, or main attacker. It's really based on the situation. But it's really nice to have this card available, and it has Ritual, which is just the cherry on top. Very important for its own ability, but not only that, also also for the purposes of getting the bonus effect on our stride bonus of Dragfall, which allows us to retire a rearguard in the same column as the card you called off a stride bonus, as well as even Dragabyss, which allows you to retire an opponent's rearguard if you call two units with the ritual ability from its ability. So Fuamnach is fantastic, the best grade 1 that we have in this lineup, and it's our go-to choice for beating down our opponent once we get to that phase of the game. Next up is 3 copies of Daellad. This is Draglancer Daellad. This card is our best card for just the early game because it allows us to build our card economy. Its effect reads Auto Ritual 1. When it's placed from deck on the rearguard circle, you Soul Blast 1 and draw 1. Very simple effect, very clear, very well outlined what it does, but also it is very important. That clarity does not necessarily say that this card is not important, we can cut this. This card at 3 copies is actually what really has made this deck as strong as it is. It's similar to those draw triggers where that seemingly minor draw power is actually very impactful for how this deck performs in the grind game, because you want to keep your card economy. That's what allows you to really be set apart from those other decks that are available in Jira, which are focused on beating you down when they get to their power spike turns, such as Heritage or Rene, which is Nubatama's win condition in Jira. Having this card to give you the extra card while also giving you a body on the board is just so insane. And this card is fantastic. It's a 7k card as well, which means it's not bad to write into, but you generally, of course, don't want to see it in your hand. Although, if you have it in your hand, it's generally good to guard with it, because that way you can get into the drop zone and then recover it back to the deck later with Dragheart or Dragfall. That way you can call it in a later turn from the deck so that you can get your value off of this card. So very important to be running this, but I do not think any more than 3 copies is necessary. It's very awkward to have it in your hand, to say the least, and also we're not necessarily looking to activate it as often as 4 copies might suggest. So I do think 3 copies is a good hard cap for it. You can even run 2 copies if you'd like, but 3 copies has worked really well for me. I have no regrets running this card at 3 copies throughout the tournament. Okay, and finally for the grade 1s, we've got 4 copies of Dragwizard Midir. So Midir, I don't think very many people ran this back in Jira actually, and I've really never seen it in Premium either. But Midir is one of my favorite grade 1s in this deck. And I'm going to be honest, despite my not having activated any of its effects too often throughout my games throughout the tournament that I participated in, I feel like it was still a very comfortable card to run. Like I didn't regret running it at this number of copies. Not only that, I did not regret having it available, having access to this as one of my grade 1 ritual cards to call off of my cards that call grade 1s in general. Just because it gives you so much free resources from as early as the beginning of the game. The thing about it is that it's a counter charger, but it does not require generation break for the counter charge. Let's go ahead and read its abilities, because I feel like not too many people are familiar with this card. We got an activated ability on the rearguard circle that is once per turn. This is a generation break 1 that is active at ritual 3. So you can counterblast 1 until end of turn. It gets plus 1k for each of your units with ritual ability. I can count on my fingers how many times I actually used that ability, and it was exactly twice. And that's not to say it's a bad ability, actually. It's very useful when the situation comes up. But the important part about this ability is that you wouldn't be able to even use it because, you know, Counterblast 1 is like so expensive for such a seemingly insignificant ability as this, right? But the reason why we actually have the luxury of being able to use that ability is because of the second ability, which we will read right now. It is an auto ability on the Vanguard Circle. We Soul Blast 1 and retire itself. At the beginning of the main phase, we pay the cost. If we do, we countercharge. And that is it. It's that simple. Guys, this is such a strong countercharger, especially for the format and the era that we're talking about. We don't have anything like Karin available for us here. You know, Karin was one of the first Shadow Paladin cards printed in V. And that card is one of the best counterchargers in V. The thing about it, we don't have that available. So we have the next best countercharger that Shadow Paladin has access to in Jira. And this card does it so well. The fact that you don't need Generation Break for this card means that we're basically, let's say you're on your grade 2 turn, you've done it, and you pass back to your opponent, and you leave this card in the field. When you get back to your next grade 3 turn, whether or not your opponent gave you damage, let's say you used your 1 counterblast already, and you're trying to guard early, because guarding early is so important for a deck like this. We're trying to grind our opponent, right? We don't want to have a bunch of early damage. And oftentimes, I see a lot of players taking a lot of early damage for Shadow Paladin, because yes, Shadow Paladin does need those counterblasts. But in reality, you'd prefer to countercharge rather than take more damage, because you want to be able to manage your damage very well so that you can actually play the control game that this deck was intended to play, which is what this build tries to make use of to the best of our ability. So this countercharge being available from the very beginning of the game is so important for that turn 2 to turn 3 transition, which I feel like is very undervalued. So this card is probably the card that makes one of our grade 2s, you know, the best early game card that we have, which I'm just gonna spoil it right now. It is Nemain. Imagine this card with Nemain. I'm sure, you know, you guys probably are imagining and, you know, frothing at the mouth at how strong of a combination these two cards have with each other. But trust me, guys, this card just does so well in its role. And even if we don't have something like Nemain available early game, let's say we didn't open it or draw it in time for the early game tempo to be achieved, well, we still have that countercharge available for future turns. And of course, as I mentioned when I was talking about the first ability, we do have that luxury because the first ability to counterblast 1 would otherwise be just so repulsive to even think of activating. It's like, what, that counterblast is just not worth it, right? But because sometimes we have so much face-up counterblast available, we have so much face-up damage available, pardon me, because we have all of that damage available at our disposal, we can easily just burn it on that first ability just to hit a magic number that we need. And magic numbers are actually so important in GRA. This is not a V where everyone just has 10k, 30k, 50k, blah blah blah, big numbers, right? GRA, the numbers are very refined. They're very specific. There's a lot of increments of 2 and 3, and these increments are extremely important when you're dealing with 11k bases across the board. And especially when you get to stride turns, a lot of times units get +3, and you need to be able to have something like this, which gives you +5 instead when you get the maximum power off of it, which allows you to hit that extra interval that you wouldn't otherwise be able to hit, and that forces another card out of your opponent. Keep in mind, guys, Jira doesn't have more than 10k shields available unless you G-guard. So if you get this card, or, you know, typically, of course, there might be an effect that gives you more shield, but we'll not get into those. Getting this card to the extra magic number with that first ability can forcibly get another card out of your opponent to guard with, which is extremely important. That matters a lot for a control deck and grind deck like this. So Midir is amazing, one of the best grade ones. So as you can see, every single grade 1 is good. There's no wasted space here. And these grade 1s all performed extremely well in the tournament, and I really don't have any cards I would substitute them for in terms of like looking back at how the tournament went. So yeah, guys, that's gonna do it for grade 1s. Let's go into the grade 2s, and I'm already gonna start off with a card that I have regrets on, but we'll go over it. We'll talk about it, guys. 4 copies of Dragwizard Morfessa. So yes, I know you guys, when you hear that name, if you're coming from premium, you're like, I get the chills, right? Because it's like, this card is so insane in premium. But no, this is not the stride version. This is the grade 2 version that was first present in Jira. In fact, it was printed in one of the early sets of G. Sorry about the shake there. It was printed in one of the early sets of G, and then reprinted, which is the version of the card that I have here, is the reprint. But Morfessa is being run in this deck because she's like a semi-beat stick. She gets 14k by herself when you have GB1 and Ritual 3. But the main reason we're running her is to get some on-hit pressure on top of the fact that in the drop zone she counts as a grade 1, or grade -1, so effectively grade 1, but you know, same deal. But that's the main reason why we're running her, guys, is that second ability to count as a grade 1 in the drop zone. We want to be able to ride a grade 2 that we can comfortably Soul Blast out later on and still have it count as a grade 1 for the purposes of our ritual, which is actually the main value of this card. However, I feel like running it for solely that reason was what made this card one of the worst performing cards in my opinion throughout my tournament run. It just never felt like this was doing anything whenever I drew it. It was good to have it to ride, mind you, and you know, I didn't open it enough times to have it be my grade 2 ride, unfortunately. That's just how it goes. You don't always open the right cards for riding. But this card can definitely be substituted for another grade 2 that we'll talk about towards the end of the actual deck profile itself. But the on hit still came up a couple times in my earlier rounds. It was nice to have the ability to call a grade 1, you know, tag this out for something like a Fuamnach and get some additional pressure. Especially important on Dragabyss turns because, you know, your opponent's going to have to guard this if they don't want to deal with like another beat stick coming at them on at the end of the battle. So Morfessa is good at, you know, that kind of mental pressure, but I feel like this is not the best choice for fulfilling the purpose of getting, you know, an additional grade 1 in our grade 1 lineup without actually it being a grade 1. So there is that to be said. But again, I do feel like this is one of the cards that performed the worst in the tournament. So we'll talk about the card I'll replace for it in future builds. And then next card is one of the best grade 2s. Basically, the rest of these grade 2s are like super good. They performed very well, and it was nothing like what Morfessa was in my tournament run. These are 3 copies of Dragwizard Naoise. So this is another card that's not really being that's not, of course, it's not really being run right now, and you know, understandably so. It's not really aged super well necessarily. But in Jira, it wasn't even being run that often either, and I was actually quite surprised at seeing a lot of lists from Jira before I recorded this video that weren't running Naoise. This card is actually super good. It gives you a free +1 when you're doing, you know, you're going through the motions of, you know, your normal stride turns. It gives you a free body on the board that also goes back to the bottom of the deck during the end of the turn. We can read its skill aloud just so that you guys are fully aware of the exact things that it does. So it's an auto ability, Generation Break 1, Ritual 3, active when you have 3 or more grade 1s, of course. That's the reminder text for Ritual 3. When it's placed on Rearguard Circle, we look at the top 5 cards of our deck. We call it to 1 grade 1 or less from among them to Rearguard Circle, and then we shuffle our deck. And then at the end of the turn, we put the unit called to the bottom of the deck. If you called a unit with the Ritual ability, Naoise is going to get +2k power, and if you called a grade 1, Naoise gets an additional +3k power. It's a long and kind of complicatedly written ability, but basically, to put it in simple terms, we play it, we check the top 5, we call a grade 1 or less from them, and if the card we called is a ritual, if the card we called has the ritual ability, it gets +2. If the card we called is also a grade 1, it gets +3. So basically, if we call a grade 1 with a ritual ability, this is going to get +5, and regardless of whether it's a grade 1 with a ritual ability or a grade 0 or whatever we called, that unit we called has to go to the bottom deck at the end of the turn, which is not a bad thing at all. That's actually an excellent thing because that makes sure that we stay healthy in terms of the number of cards that we have in our deck. And as I kind of hinted at before, guys, this is a control grind deck. We want to make sure not to deck out before our opponent does, because otherwise we kind of lose the whole purpose of being a grind deck in the first place. So now is being able to put the unit back to the bottom of the deck means that you're going +1 essentially for free. Like, you're losing nothing really. And the fact that this also remains on the field as a grade 2 to intercept with, extremely important, because we want to save those cards in our hand just in case we're going to have our backs against the wall towards the end of the game, where our opponent either goes into their GB8 or their best finisher. So Naoise is very strong, and of course it doesn't do anything in the early game. That's just the nature of a lot of Jira cards. But once you get that first stride, this card does a lot in terms of giving you some tempo and giving you some card advantage that we very much value. Of course, it gives you some pressure as well, because by itself it becomes either an 11k or a 14k, which is both. I mean, both numbers are really good. So having that by itself is very strong. And I forgot to mention this as well. Since the card goes to the bottom, if it stays on the field, let's say you call the card and you use that card to retire as a cost for something else, which is not very unusual at all. The good thing about this is that you could use that it's very reasonable to do that, because you want some retire fodder sometimes. But the problem is that if you retire that unit that you called off of this ability, it will no longer go to the bottom of the deck because it's no longer considered that unit. That unit was retired and it's in the drop zone now, and then if you call it back again, it's not going to be the same unit that was called off of Naoise. So do keep that in mind, guys, but also remember that Naoise still keeps its power regardless of whether the unit leaves the field afterwards. Okay, we still got 2 more grade 2s, guys, in the lineup. The next grade 2 is my favorite grade 2. Even though it's not the best grade 2, it is the best grade 2 for early game, that's for sure. It's still my favorite grade 2 because of how much it did by itself. This card put in so much work in the tournament. This is 3 copies of Skullwitch Nemain. Sorry, I'm trying to center it. It's really weird to position it because like I'm angled from the camera. But anyway, this is Skullwitch Nemain. This is the original Nemain that was printed in BT04, and I've kind of mentioned this already if you guys did watch my first Luard deck profile on the channel that I did in April. But this Nemain is very simple. It's an auto ability on the rearguard circle. When it's placed, we counterblast 1 and choose a Shadow Paladin from hand and put it in the drop zone. Specifically, it says discard it, so it doesn't have to be put in the drop zone as a result. But anyway, we choose a Shadow Paladin from our hand and discard it, and then we draw 2. Very, very simple. Pot of greed, like that. But the best part about this card is that it's 3,000 power. And I know you guys are like, wait, what? It's 3,000 power? That's the best part about it? What are you talking about, Bootsy? Well, here's what I mean, guys. When we look at Jira, we look at the metagame that existed kind of before the reboot happened. It was stuff like Shiranui, it was stuff like ZTB, and it was stuff like I believe Altmile. The one I want to specifically focus on is Shiranui, and they're running a card called I don't know the full name of the card. We'll just call it Rena because that's what it was called. Rena is a stride that is really one of the most suppressive strides in all of G. Basically what it does is it makes the opponent call cards from their hand to their rearguard circle, dominates them, and dominate just means that basically you take control of their the units that they called, and those units attack their Vanguard. So if I'm the one that's playing Rena and I use its ability, my opponent will call the 2 cards from their hand to the not Guardian Circle, to the rearguard circle, and those units will attack the Vanguard. And you know, it might sound very harmless, right? It's like, oh, they just attacked the Vanguard, right? I can just call the Nemain and it won't hit, right? We'll have no problem. Yes, that is actually the right thinking. That's the right line of thinking I want you guys to kind of see here. We have this card in the deck not just for that draw 2, which is very strong, which is very, easy conditions to fulfill as well, because we don't need to discard like a specific ritual card or grade 1 or anything like that, but also the fact that this card is 3,000 power. This means this is our prime target to keep in hand against something like Rena. That way we can make sure that, if they use Rena's ability, we call this card and we don't have to block with as many cards from our hand with our own card. Now, unfortunately, we won't get the ability of Nemain by calling it in that manner, because when this card is called from Rena's skill, it gets immediately dominated, so we can't use the ability as if it were our own card. Our opponent can use our ability if they wanted to, but of course they're not very likely to have a Shadow Paladin in their hand if they're playing Rena. So that's at least something that we dodge. But the good thing about calling this is that you call it off of Rena's ability, and this card is going to get +5, so it's going to become 8,000. And if they're at GB3 with Rena, it's going to become an additional +10 and a crit. So this becomes an 18k card when we call it off of Rena's ability. 18k versus 11k sounds scary with 2 crit, but in reality it's just 10k shield to guard. Whereas if we called something like a 9k card, that card would be getting an additional 5 to make it 14, plus an additional 10 to make it 24, which means, guys, we would need 15k shield to guard. And 15k shield is hard to come by, especially for a deck like this. Our best shield value card, as I mentioned in the beginning of the deck profile, is Belial Owl. And Belial Owl is a 10k shield, yes, but then in order to fill that extra 5, we still need another card in hand. And if we don't have Belial Owl, that means we have to use 3 cards in our hand. Very bad. So you don't want to be calling a 9k card. You want to be calling this anytime you're against Arena, which is why we're running this card in the first place. This card is really good, not just as our early game draw power, but for that exact reason as well. So the fact that it fulfills both those purposes in a format in a meta game where Shiranui is one of the best decks is very extremely important to have this card. And anytime I open this in my hand, just generally speaking, guys, throughout the tournament, anytime I open Nemain, it usually put me in a good, I say usually, it was pretty much every time it put me in a good position. Now, anytime it didn't put me in a good position, it wasn't because of Nemain. It was because some other factors that caused me to get a little bit behind. And we'll go over those, of course, when we get to the end of the video. But Nemain is fantastic, and I hope that these reasons that I gave do convince you guys that this card is a fantastic card to run, and especially Jira, and especially our grind control Luard build. I would run 4 if it were practical, but 4 is not very practical because you don't want to be in a position where you're riding Nemain. It's still terrible to ride Nemain, of course. And of course, fortunately, I never was in a position where I had to ride Nemain. But I also did keep it in my hand anytime I opened it. So perhaps I am just, the best person at luck, but I doubt that. I doubt that it's too unlikely to open both Nemain and another grade 2 at some point. Alright, our next and final grade 2 is 2 copies of Dragwizard Uscias. This is another card that people didn't really run back in Jira, and people definitely do not run now, and of course, people should not be running this card nowadays in Premium. But in Jira, it's actually a pretty good card for this exact build. The nice thing about it, of course, it is a promo, so that's perhaps why a lot of people didn't know about it. But the nice thing about Uscias is that it allows us to facilitate our grind game a little better. Basically, what the first ability does, the whole idea behind my running this card in this build, is that it allows you to bottom deck a normal unit basically without having to draw any cards before you do that. So the fact that this gets like its first ability allows you to get a net card back to your deck, basically increase your deck size by 1 in terms of our net cards in our deck, is very extremely important because keep in mind something like something like a Dragfall or a Dragheart, they both basically have a net 0 cards returned to deck. Even though they bottom deck for your stride cost, if you use the stride bonus, you're calling another card back out from your deck, so you're not actually increasing your deck size by any amount. And then Dragheart, it bottom decks 2, and then you call 2 as well from its stride bonus. So if you're using those stride bonuses, you're not actually getting any new cards back in your deck. But if you combine cards like this with Belial Owl, you're actually getting net cards back into your deck, which allows you to kind of do some compression shenanigans once the game goes on for a really long time. And that's where this deck really shines. That's where this deck really gets its advantage over some of the other decks that are available in Jira. So Uscias being able to do that is extremely important. Now the specifics of how we're able to bottom deck are as follows. We activate this ability on the rearguard circle. It's a once per turn, and we have to have Ritual 3. So we would counterblast 1 if we have a Vanguard Luard. So that means we can't use this ability unless we have Ritual 3 and we have a Vanguard Luard, which is basically once we hit grade 3. But once we do that, we choose one of our grade 1s in the drop zone, and we increase Uscias' power by the power of that grade 1. And then we may put that card at the bottom of our deck. So we don't have to put the unit we chose to the bottom of our deck, but pretty much every time I've done this, I can count like 2 times I didn't bottom deck it, and the main reason I wouldn't do that is because I know I'm going to kill my opponent, and I don't really want to put this normal unit back into the bottom of my deck because I want to keep my deck nice and thin with triggers and such, because at that point I had enough triggers in my deck to not really need additional normal units in there. But the extra power it gets is really nice because, again, those magic numbers are very important. Not to mention the fact that if we choose off of Uscias' ability something like sorry for the reach over, something like Morfessa. Morfessa is a grade 1 in the drop zone if we have GB1. If we choose Morfessa off of Uscias' ability, we can get +9 despite Morfessa seeming like grade 2. So getting +9 off of this is like a nice high roll, especially when it's boosted by something like a Midir with its ability having been activated, or something like a Fuamnach where we can hit 14 plus 18, which is 32, a very good magic number to hit. And it's not something that we can hit with other cards being chosen off of Uscias because all our other grade 1s are actually 7k. So if we choose a 7k grade 1, it would be 16 plus the 14, which is only 30k. And 30k is not good enough for the magic number. We want to hit that 31 or the 36 or etc., because the 11k magic number is the most important magic numbers in Jira. So that's Uscias' first ability. The second ability is the ability to choose one of our other rearguards and retire it. When this unit's attack hits from the rearguard circle, if we're at generation break 1, we draw a card after we pay the cost. So that second ability sounds, very minor. It doesn't sound like it does much of anything, but actually it's extremely important for clearing your board, making it less vulnerable to stuff like stuff like Shiranui, where they have all these strides that can dominate your units and dominate your units that are on the board. If they run out of Rena, or if they're not going into Rena at the moment, you don't want to have extra rear guards on the board, because then they just dominate them, use them to attack your Vanguard, and then you're burning more cards from your hand unnecessarily. And this was also important in one of the matchups I faced Link Joker. And the thing about Link Joker is that oftentimes, if you don't have any rear guards on the board, they have to force you to put cards from your hand onto your circles as locked cards. So you much rather force them to do that than leave rearguards on the board for them to just keep unlocking over and over, and you feel like you can't do anything. Now, that was one of the matchups I faced, and I actually did beat that player. So we'll go over how that went and why I was able to do so, despite this deck seemingly having a bad matchup against it because of those reasons I just outlined. But this ability to retire and draw a card I've used very often. It's not very hard to actually get this to hit because it doesn't have to hit the Vanguard. It doesn't say when its unit's attack hits a Vanguard. It just says when it hits. So the nice thing is that there are a lot of ways to make this hit and kind of coerce your opponent into guarding. And getting that card draw is actually extremely non-trivial. So I love this card. It did a lot for the deck, but there are a few other cards that I might change it out for in my next build that I choose to run for future JIRA tournaments with this deck. There's a couple other grade 2s I wanted to try out, and I just didn't have a chance to test them before the tournament started, so I had to go with this one. But this one performed extremely well, so it's not like I had any regrets with it. And it plays right into our grind win condition. So the win condition of attrition is especially important to fulfill by every card that you can in Luard because it does it so well. And you're about to see why it does it so well when we get to the grade 3s. We've got our grade 3s coming down here. We've got the bosses, the boss himself, Dragfall, and the secondary boss, Dragheart. We're running a 3-2 split, and I kind of explained in my previous Shadow Paladin deck profile, which I did for Morfessa Turbo, the concepts, the theory behind running splits of any combination of these two cards. For JIRA, the theory is a little different, but in practice it's the same idea. You typically want to ride Dragheart first if you're able to, but it also depends on the matchup a bit, because Dragheart allows you to recover stuff from your drops into your deck throughout the game to keep your deck, going, to keep your engine of grade 1s with Ritual going. That way you have enough to call throughout the game. And then that way you're also keeping up card advantage early, because being able to call 2 grade 1s off of this early game is super strong. You get to call something like Daellad plus, Midir, which allows you to both draw 1 and Soul Blast countercharge 1. That's, of course, a lot of soul, which is why you need those draw triggers, as I mentioned before. But being able to call 2 grade 1s early game is so good. But there are some matches where you much rather get the retire off of your stride bonus, which is why Dragfall needs to be run at additional copies, because there are plenty of times where I had only Dragheart, and I'm like, I wish this was Dragfall rather than Dragheart, because I wanted to retire my opponent's rearguards and keep up the tempo. It's very important to maintain tempo and maintain the control over the game, because your win condition is attrition a lot of times, guys. We don't have necessarily big finishers or big numbers that we can rely upon when the situation gets a little difficult. We need to be able to just grind our opponent. We need to be able to keep up our turns as consistently as we can. And the way we do that is by building our card advantage and maintaining it for the course of each of our strides. No stride in this deck is actually useless. No stride does nothing. It's very important that every stride does something, and in order to accomplish that, we do need to have this retire available, especially against decks that aren't able to build their boards rebuild their boards as easily when stuff gets removed, which is a lot of decks actually in JIRA, believe it or not. But Dragheart was still very important because Dragheart allows you to grind a little better. It returns more normal units back to the deck, and that stride bonus is not necessarily mandatory. It does say, if you pay the cost, which is counterblast 1, and choose one of your rearguards to retire, you search your deck for up to 2 grade 1s. So you do not have to call 2, but typically you would be calling 2 just to get the maximum advantage early game. Later into the game, it's more important to just get the normal units back to the bottom of the deck, because there are a couple stipulations that are important to point out about this card that are why it's such a good grind card for this deck to fulfill the attrition win condition. The first part is that when you bottom deck your 2 normal units, of course you have to have Ritual 3 for that. When you bottom deck your 2 normal units, it fulfills the cost for stride, but it's optional. It says you may stride without paying the cost for stride the next time you stride. It doesn't say you have to stride. So what I like doing is if I rode Dragheart first, and I do this at the beginning of the ride phase to bottom deck 2 normal units just to get my deck a little bigger. That way I can grind a little better than my opponent right from the get-go. Then after I've done that at the beginning of the ride phase, I ride into Dragfall, and I use Dragfall's ability to stride with its ability instead of striding with my no stride cost from Dragheart's first ability. That way we're still be able to bottom deck 3 units, but then also still stride for free effectively with Dragheart's ability. this is the way the card interaction works because Dragheart is written as optional, and Dragfall is a continuous ability that says this is the cost for stride instead of, you know, the normal cost of stride by discarding some of grade 3s, discarding cards whose sum are grade 3 or greater from your hand. So that's like the ideal order of writing these cards in order to have that fulfilled. But there were a lot of times where I had Dragfall as my first grade 3 and I just wrote it because, you know, I just want to write up to grade 3. I don't care too much about write order necessarily. And then I later found Dragheart and I'm like, yeah, I want to grind. I want to write into Dragheart. And it's a little awkward to do this because you also still want to stride, right? But the problem with it is that Dragfall is continuous. It's a replacement cost for it's a replacement effect for the cost of stride. So when you ride over Dragheart, you're not actually able to use Dragheart's first ability to bottom deck 2 normal units and use that as the optional cost for stride because it says at the beginning of the ride phase, and you've already passed the beginning of the ride phase by the time you ride into Dragheart. Which means that if you ride into Dragheart on top of Dragfall, you do need to stride the normal way, otherwise known as the peasant stride. This is not actually what it's called. This is just the funny name I came up with. But the peasant stride means that if you ride into Dragheart over Dragfall, you do have to discard the sum of cards. You do have to discard cards from your hand whose sum is grade 3 or more as a cost for stride instead of using Dragheart's replacement. So it does get awkward in those instances, but trust me, it's very much worth it. And it was very much worth it in those matches where I was able to win by deck out, because having this card, like basically it was like, okay, I know I have to win by deck out here. Let me just ride on top of the Dragfall. That way I can start getting normal units starting from my next turn. And it's not as slow as you think, guys, because Jira is a much more reasonable format to play grind decks like this in. It's not like Premium where doing such a turn is just super bad loss of tempo. Especially for this deck, we're not actually losing any tempo because, again, Dragheart is still calling 2 grade 1s or lower off of its stride bonus if we so choose. Now, the problem with Dragheart, and, you know, kind of why Dragfall is just a better card in general, other than the fact that it's a continuous ability for its bottom deck a normal unit to replace the cost for stride, is that Dragheart Dragheart requires a rearguard to retire for its stride bonus, which means that despite the fact that we're still going +1, in order to call those 2 grade 1s, we have to have a rearguard on the field to retire. And there are just certain matchups where that's just not possible. I can think of already the Link Joker matchup, which I did face, guys, and that was honestly grueling. It sounds bad, but I actually managed to win, and it was a 2-0 as well. So, you know, having this deck available, doing all that it did, I don't think a normal Luard deck would have been able to do this. But this deck, I think, was basically meant for the job, and we got it done. But this card's stride bonus was basically dead in that matchup because we never had a time where we had rearguards that stuck in order to use the stride bonus. So I was like, okay, yeah, I gotta have this on the field just in order to be able to stride without paying the cost. But then forget the stride bonus, man. It's not gonna ever happen. But that's just the way the meatball bounces sometimes. It was very important to have these 2 cards available still, so I have no regrets about this at all. But in terms of the actual ratios, I do think they can be fine-tuned a little bit, but I'm not necessarily going to do that for the next build. I do think where these cards were in terms of the ratios is just fine. You really don't want to be running more than 5 grade 3s in the Luard because you're going to be using the bottom deck most of the time anyway. And the only reason why I'm running multiple copies of Dragfall, a card like that, is that we do need to see it. It's very important to see at least one of them. And being able to rewrite over one of the Dragfalls is nice for just getting soul right away, because there are some times we're in a crunch where we don't have enough soul in order to get our play started. But if you want to get the soul before your main phase, then you do need to be able to have another Dragfall that you can ride into in order to go into something like Daellad or Midir, which requires soul. So guys, that is all for the main deck. I know I spent a lot of time going over that, and yes, I did kind of warn you guys already. This was going to be the most in-depth deck profile that I've pretty much ever done on this channel, and we're already at 54 minutes, so we've got plenty more to cover. It's going to take well over an hour here already. But now that we got the G zone left to cover, so to start the G zone, we're going to cover, like, we're basically going to go in order of kind of the normal stride pattern that this deck would do. And this is not like a hard order, guys. This is mostly just, you know, depends on the matchup. You do have to make the adjustments yourself. But this is kind of just like the rough idea, so to speak. So first off, we got 2 copies of Supremacy Black Dragon Aurageyser Dragon. So this card is mainly in here as our first stride. This is probably, it's not like our best first stride, but it is best as our first stride. So if we were to stride into Aurageyser Dragon, it would be best to do it as our first stride in order to get the best value out of it. Excuse me. And also the reason why we're running Aurageyser Dragon is that not only is it best to do first stride, but also best to do as our first stride when we get the first stride, which basically is another way of saying, guys, if we went second and we rode into our grade 3 second and our opponent's already on grade 3, then we stride into this. That's basically the situation where this card is best to do as first stride. If we go first, and which basically means we ride to grade 3 first, our opponent does their stride first, and then we have the opportunity to stride. Especially if we've G-guarded, guys, you'd rather go into our next stride, which we'll talk about, which is Dragabyss, because we're already going to get the 10k to front row for every 4 grade 1s in our drops and off of that. But if we get the first stride of the game, this is best as our first stride for that first stride of the game. And there's a reason for this. Let's go ahead and read its ability, because I don't think I've covered it on this channel before. So it's an auto ability from the Vanguard circle. We counter +1, soul +1. We choose the same copy and turn it face up, and we choose 2 of our rearguards to retire. And then the trigger is, when this unit attacks a Vanguard, you may pay the cost. If you do, reveal the top 2 cards of your deck, and for each grade 1 or less revealed, this unit gets +5 until the end of the turn, and then you put the revealed cards into your hand. That is the most important part of this card's ability, and that's why we're running it, actually. The fact that you're basically able to get, like, it's not like 5 drive checks, but it's basically like 5 cards to your hand when you do your first stride, on top of the Daellad that you usually go into, on top of the rest of the card advantage you're building. This card allows you to build your card economy so fast. It allows you to accelerate into that attrition win condition from their first stride and onward. And it does a really good job of it, to be honest. The fact that we're retiring 2 rearguards is no problem at all. We honestly don't really want to leave rearguards in the field for the most part with this deck, other than perhaps our grade 2 interceptors, and maybe a grade 1 that we'd like to keep on the board if we have Dragheart on the field as our Vanguard, because, you know, we want Dragheart to be able to retire something for its stride bonus. But otherwise, guys, we don't really care about leaving rearguards in the field, so the 2 rearguards to retire is not a problem at all. But the additional +5 this gets for each grade 1 or less revealed means that we're also putting a little bit of pressure on our opponent. It's not just like a vanilla get 5 cards to your hand on your first stride. It is actually getting some power in there, just in case, you know, sometimes people do like guarding the first stride because they want to keep their damage low, and I'm one of those people. So, you know, this is definitely something that is non-trivial if I were facing the card like this. But the additional +5 I guess for each grade 1 or less that you revealed does mean that your opponent's going to have to work a little harder if they want to keep their damage low early on against this card as the first stride. So I love this card, and it's very important to have this available in our stride lineup. And it was, anytime I went into this, it was usually as my first stride, because from the second stride and onward, it's not really as good. Okay, next stride. 4 copies of Dragabyss. I hope this is not a surprise. This is our best stride, basically, in terms of versatility, in terms of the sheer number of situations where it's good. This card is never bad, pretty much, to go into. I'd say the only time it's like bad is if you don't have Ritual X, basically. Like, of course, if you're not at GB3 either, then you wouldn't really care anyway. But if you're at GB3 and you don't have like Ritual 4, then this card is kind of right? But anyway, this card is really good. I've already covered like the abilities in previous Luard builds that I've done on this channel for the meta back in April for Springfest, as well as the Morfessa Turbo build that I covered in August. So if you guys haven't already checked those, please do so. That's where I'll go over Dragabyss in more detail. But I'll talk about Dragabyss in the context of this deck in G format. Dragabyss is extremely important for your tempo, because it not only allows you to get yourself two grade 1 rearguards from your deck to, you know, build your field a little bit, but it also allows you to retire one of your opponent's rearguards if you call 2 grade 1s that have the ritual ability, which is basically all the time, because all the grade 1s in this deck have the ritual ability. So the other part about Dragabyss that is important, guys, is that it gives us a bottom line for our ritual that we're building in our drop zone. Oftentimes with this deck, we're not really trying to get huge numbers of grade 1s in our drop zone, except for the exact payoff of this card. So getting something like Ritual 12 will matter into the late game, which is why it's good to save one of your Dragabysses for late game. That way, you know, you have good scaling that you can fall upon when you get to late game and you want to finish off your opponent. oftentimes you'll be going into this early on, like let's say as your first or second stride, and then you'd save, because you have to flip a Dragabyss in order to pay the cost. You'd save the other pair of Dragabysses for the future turn that I described, where you have a lot of cards of grade 1s in your drop zone. So that's Dragabyss, guys. Very strong stride, especially in G era format, and it's probably the most versatile stride that we have available. Very important. Next up is one copy of Dark Dragon Spectral Blaster Diablo. I went into this card exactly once, and it's mostly because I needed an additional stride to go into to keep my card advantage going. This card is basically your restander. It's very generic, but it has a better payoff if you use it in a Diablo-based deck. But we're using it mainly in Luard for the situation I just described, where we kind of need a little bit of more grind, and the other strides are just not available, or we need to save them for whatever reason. This was necessary when I faced Chaos, which is Link Joker. This card, the time I strode into this was one of the few times I was actually able to activate my stride, my G unit's effect, because most of the time my strides were just super vanilla. They were just 26k vanillas that drove check for 3, because I didn't have enough rear guard. I didn't have enough open rear guard circles in order to actually use any of their effects, but for some reason I had enough to use this ability. So it was interesting. You know, I used it exactly once. I didn't use it any other time. I used it as flip fodder for every other time. But hey, it's good. It's good to have this available for those situations. The ability itself reads. I believe I've covered this card before, actually. But anyway, we Soul Blast 1, choose a face down card from your G zone and turn it face up, and then we choose one of our rear guards and retire it. And then until end of turn, this unit gets auto once per turn on the Vanguard circle. We Generation Break 3, Counterblast 2, and choose 2 of your rear guards and retire them. At the end of the battle, it's attacked. You may pay the cost. If you do stand, it restands, and then it gets Strive -2. And then if you have a hard card in its name with Diablo, you search your deck for a grade 1, call it, shuffle your deck. The payoff for having Diablo is not really that big, but it's non-trivial as well. So it's worth mentioning, I guess. Because that ability is also gained... excuse me. That ability is also gained after you use the Soul Blast. It's not gained after you attack with the Vanguard. It gets the after the end of the battle ability to restand, as well as the ability to call a grade 1 if you have a hard card Diablo in the name at the time of activating the first ability. So the restanding, it's a hefty cost. It's not really worth it most of the time, but again, it was helpful in one of my matchups, so very important to still run it, but otherwise it's pretty much flip fodder. Alright, the next card is one copy of Draganger Ogma. This card is very good. In G-Era, it's a lot better than it is currently, but the main reason we're running this is basically as an intermediary turn in order to reinforce our card advantage. Let's say we have 11 cards in hand and our opponent has, like, let's say 9. We want to basically bring them down in cards in their hand. That way, like, let's say we've already gotten their field to a pretty low number, or they just don't call that many rear guards in general. This way we're able to bring a lot of cards out of their hand and prepare for a future turn, set up for a turn like Dragstrider or Diablo, where they don't have a lot of cards in their hand, and that way they won't be able to survive if we try to outgrind them or finish them off with one of our finisher strides. So I've read its ability in a previous deck profile as well, Luard, so I won't go into too much detail of its ability, but in terms of how useful it was in the tournament run, it very much helped out again in my Nubatama matchup, because Nubatama does want some combo pieces in their hand. It also helped out against my ZTB matchup, where they also like having combo pieces. But just generally speaking, there are a few times where I went into this card instead of another stride, and another stride would have been a lot better than going into this card. Because generally you don't want to activate its ability unless you do have 3 grade 1s to be able to retire. I feel like 3 grade 1s is the sweet spot for it, because you don't want to not draw a card, basically. Like drawing a card as the payoff for retiring 3, or putting 3 in the drop zone between both you and your opponent, which requires at least 2 to be retired. But you might as well retire 3, because 3 is a good sweet spot for all the cards they're able to bring out on the field through our card advantage mechanisms, such as Naoise, such as Dragheart and Dragfall, etc. But the fact that you need, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, and have Ritual 5 means that this card is not really active into our second stride. And I think there are a lot better other second strides that we can go into, such as Dragabyss or even Spectral Blaster Diablo, because Diablo is also online at that period of time. But Dragabyss is typically better second stride. So Ogma doesn't actually, like, it's not really the best stride to go into when it sounds useful. And there were a couple times where I did get, like, when I went into it, it was like, ah, man, this might have lost me the game because I didn't really get much tempo out of actually going into this card. But you know, it's still nice to have in the G zone as an available option. And then we've got one copy of Dragstrider. Dragstrider is insane. This is probably, I mean, this is one of the best finishers, if not for like Diablo, which we'll go over. Phantom Blast for Diablo, that is. But Dragstrider is very, very strong at what it does. In Jira, it's very like in Premium, it's not as like good anymore because you know, not being able to call grade 1 or greater cards from hand is no big deal when you have draw PGs that, you know, you just put on the Guardian Circle and immediately invalidate this card. But in Jira, where you don't have draw PGs and every PG is a grade 1 or higher, this card is insane. Basically, the only things they can use to guard with this are grade 0s, which, you know, very possible to do, or they have to use G Guardians. But oftentimes when you go into this, your opponent either will have G-guarded enough times because, you know, our games are really long, guys. Our games are, I didn't mention this at the beginning of the video, but on average, most of my games were at least an hour long, and there were no time limits. I'll go over this kind of when I get to the report of the actual tournament itself. But you want to go into this when you know your opponent's run out of their resources, such as their G-Guardians and their available, like, trigger units that they're able to guard with. Because, you know, once this game gets really long, you'll have this available to go into, and then you go into it and your opponent's like, ah, man, I have like 14 trigger units in my drop zone or something like that, or oh man, I've gone through all my G Guardians. That's when you know this card is going to win you the game. And it's a similar story for our next card. And, you know, again, if you guys aren't familiar with the skill, I highly suggest checking out my other Luard deck profiles. But Dragstrider is a fantastic finisher, alongside as well Phantom Bastard Diablo. This card is actually the best finisher that Shadow Paladin has in general. Not only is it generic, but it's also a flat-out guard restrict. Like, your opponent cannot guard from hand at all. So that means they have to have the G Guardians in their hand. And there's actually one instance where I went into this, and it was against Shiranui. This is actually the final of the tournament. We did a top cut, and I made it to the top 2, and faced Shiranui in the final game. And I actually went into Diablo in order to hopefully finish my opponent off from there being at 4 damage. And I had this at 36k. It was actually at 39k. And it was boosted by a Fuamnach, which brought it to 53k. And if I had actually just put in another draw trigger and sold to give it an extra 3k to put it at 56, guys, this is why magic numbers are so important, then my opponent would not have been able to guard it at all, because my opponent needed two G Guardians in order to put this at 1 to pass. And just unfortunately for me, I didn't get any triggers off of my drive check. So my best chance at finishing off my opponent was sorely missed. And that's really what lost me the game there. Now, I will say that you do need to have a lot of prior good stride turns in order for this card to be properly set up. But when this card is properly set up, it does the finishing job so well. So very good card, especially in Jira. And even in Premium, it's actually aged pretty well. It's still a good card, still worth running in Premium. I'm actually running it personally, just in case games go long enough for this card to ever come up and, you know, the opponents run out of their G Guardians. So this card is like the guaranteed finisher of sorts. Very good to have. And thankfully, there's nothing to worry about with regards to like Protect 2 markers or stuff that intercepts for high shield value or anything like that that can circumvent the call from hand guard restrict, because Jira doesn't have any of those. So we're in good shape there. All right, and last but not least, we got the G Guardians. And I'm going to tell you guys already, this is not the best G Guardian lineup at all. But I had made an error in my deck log, so I just had to kind of eat it. And that might have been like the fall of me in some of my matches, but honestly, considering that I still finished second, guys, like, you know, maybe it wasn't that big of a deal after all. But I even think this entire deck is not the most optimized build or representation of grindy control Luard and Jira, but you know, we made it work, and there's still some improvements that I'll go over soon that can allow this deck to be even better. So first off, we've got Darkveil Dragon, which is just your Omega G Guardian. It's like it guards for high shield values late game, but I'm gonna be honest, guys. I went into this card exactly once for its actual ability, and every other time I just went into it for a vanilla G Guardian. That way I can increase my generation break. That was literally it. And also the only reason I did that as well is because I wanted those 15k shields off of one card in hand. Keep in mind that Jira, guys, doesn't have any 15k shields, which is a huge deal. Which means when you get to those magic numbers that require your opponent to guard with 15k shield, I kind of mentioned this already when I talked about Belial Owl and the trigger lineup. But those 15k shield magic numbers are hard to deal with because you have to go into a G Guardian. But oftentimes some G Guardians are awkward to go into because it's like a wasted shield. Like if you go into Plot Maker in those situations, you're wasting 10k shield for a time where you could actually need that additional 10k shield for a bigger attack. So Darkveil, I guess was good for that purpose. I don't know, but I really only used its skill once to Soul Blast and gain +5 for every grade 1 in my drop zone. So definitely, guys, make sure you run one of this. Don't mess up your deck log like I did, and make sure that you run only one of this because you only need one. This really should have been a third Plot Maker, but I'll go over that, don't worry. Next card is Jeliddo. Jeliddo is good in Jira, but it's not as good as it is now in Premium because the shield values on grade 1s are still 5k in Jira. So you're not getting as much shield value as you possibly could in Premium, but it's still fantastic because you're able to G-flip, which gives you some extra generation break, as well as being able to draw a card if you move to grade 1 or less units. And moving to grade 1 or less units is not hard at all, guys. I mean, we have plenty of grade 1s in this deck, plenty of grade 0s that might stick as well, which actually did happen a number of times when I faced Shiranui and Chaos, which is Link Joker, because, they leave your dominated units in the field, as well as your locked cards in the field a couple of times. So Jeliddo is really nice to have for those purposes. There were a couple of times where I went into it as a vanilla 15k shield, but that was simply because it didn't have Generation Break 1, so I couldn't even use the ability in the first place. And I just wanted to make sure to use the heal trigger that I had in my hand for the 15k shield value, while also getting a heal trigger in the drop zone, so, for my later bind payoff, which gives me a counter charge or a soul charge once I use my second G Guardian. And last but not least, this is the best G Guardian, guys. 2 copies of Plot Maker. Plot Maker is just a 25k shield, very simple. But I already mentioned in the beginning of the video that simple is actually what makes these G Guardians so strong. Plot Maker being a free 25k shield without having too hard of a condition to fulfill means that we have a lot of stability for our defense, which increases the strength of our grind game, as I've mentioned before. This card is what made this deck so resilient and so effective at pulling off our attrition win condition, especially in those matchups where a lot of times other decks would just flip over and die if they didn't have enough cards in hand to deal with it. But we're able to because we have all those cards to facilitate that. And Plot Maker is one of those important cards to do so. So, guys, wow. If you made it to the end of our deck profile, I must say, congrats to you. But this is not good enough. We're not done here yet, guys. We still have plenty more to cover. And for the next section of this video, we're going to go over some additional card choices. We're going to go over my tournament run itself. We'll run through the rounds that I did. And then we'll kind of talk about some additional auxiliary things that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. So first off, we'll talk about some additional card choices that I could have run. The first card I 100% should have run is 4 copies of Slaptail instead of running my 4 copies of Morfessa. As I already told you guys when I talked about Morfessa was very ineffective. She didn't really accomplish what I had thought she would, which is getting some on-hit pressure, and that's because most opponents just don't really care. They'll just guard it anyway, and 14k is not enough to justify an on-hit that doesn't really do much anyway, because it just gives you an extra attack. It doesn't really give you additional card advantage like Dogda would. Slaptail is so much better at still fulfilling the beat stick while also being a grade 1 both in your deck and your drop zone when you're at when you have a grade 4 Vanguard with Luard. And the nice thing about it, I guess it doesn't say GB1, even though in order to have a grade 4 you have to be at Generation Break 1 most of the time. But I guess if they in the future, if they print I can't say in the future because this is Jira, but I guess if we're talking about Premium and they did print a grade 4 with Luard in the name, then I guess that would matter. But anyway, Slaptail is much better to run than Morfessa. I will be running Slaptail instead of Morfessa in the future, so just so you guys are aware. This card is so much better to run for this purpose because it gives you the extra grade 1 in drop. Another grade 1 that we can also return from the drop zone to the bottom of the deck with Uscias. And then also it gives us some additional power when we call more grade 1s throughout the turn if we call this as our first grade 1. Which means that this is not a bad card to call first when you go into your Dragfall stride bonus or your Dragheart stride bonus. So that's all for Slaptail. It's really quick because Slaptail is just an obvious replacement for Morfessa, but again, I didn't test this deck super thoroughly before the tournament itself, but once we went to the tournament, I will say it performed extremely well, so there's that. The next card I would run instead of one of the cards that we did have in our deck for this tournament is 3 copies of Sweep Alner Kethlin. This card I'm sure you guys have never seen before. So I'm going to explain it before I reveal the card that I would replace it for. So this card is an auto ability on the rearguard circle with Ritual 3. We counterblast 1 and choose one of our other rearguards and retire it. At the end of our turn is the condition to fulfill it. We may pay the cost. If we do, we retire all of our opponent's rearguards in the same column as this unit. This card is so strong, and I had intended it in putting in my deck log before the tournament began, but I just didn't have time to test it, so I just wasn't confident enough in running such a niche and non-standard card as this. But I definitely should have run it and just believed in myself, because the card that actually it would have replaced was a few of these copies of Uscias. And it's not that Uscias is bad, but it's more so that if I think about the long-term value and in terms of what these 2 cards do and what the niches they fulfill is, I feel like Kethlin does a lot better of a job in enabling my grind game than a simple card that that allows you to bottom deck 1 normal unit at the cost of your counterblast. They both have to retire a rearguard as cost for their respective card advantage abilities. Like, you know, for Uscias, it's GB1. You have to retire one of your other rearguards and then draw a card. But for Kethlin, it doesn't have GB1, but not only that, you can retire one of your rearguards at the end of your turn. So you're actually not losing much at all, because when you do it at the end of your turn, it doesn't interfere with your attack patterns. Not only that, but because we're retiring 2 of our opponent rearguard at most, that means that we're actually able to get some advantage off of this card inherently without having to go through any hoops. Not to mention, guys, if we retire Belial Owl off the ability of Kethlin, we actually still get to draw a card, which means we get more advantage. Plus, we're able to still bottom deck Belial Owl, because Belial Owl does not require itself to be done at the very, very beginning of our end phase. It just says at the end of our turn, which means that if it's put in the drop zone later than normal, we still get its ability off regardless. It's not like some other cards that say at the beginning of the end phase or at the end, or, you know, another way of saying, you know, some specific timing during the end phase where it might be missed if it's not already in the drop zone. But no, Belial Owl works perfectly with Kethlin. So fantastic card that I would have wanted to run, but just didn't have enough time to test it out. And I think this card would have done extremely well in the Link Joker matchup, which, guys, we'll go over pretty soon here, so just be patient. But Kethlin is extremely good for our control, grindy, Luard control Giera build. So it's a deserved replacement in favor of the other card that I was running in Uscias, but not to worry, guys, because Uscias still did perform well. It wasn't like Morfessa where it did absolutely nothing. So that's all for the cards that I would 100% would have run in the main deck. Just didn't have enough time to test it, or just made a mistake on my end with the deck log. Now onto cards that I think can be run, but I probably will not run in the future iterations of this build. Dagda is one of them. Now, a lot of you probably, you know, saw the deck and were like, where's Dagda? Luard without Dagda? In the year of our Lord 2022? What is this guy thinking? Right? Like, yes, Dagda is a good card. And I gotta tell you the story, guys. I did say at the beginning of this video, I'll tell you the story of how I came about this build. And Dagda is the perfect time to talk about it. So the reason why I came up with this build, guys, is that I have the premium Luard deck, right? And currently my premium Luard deck is sleeved separately, so it's in its own deck box. It has its own cards and everything. I did not import any of those cards into this deck. And I was like, oh man, I don't feel like, you know, repurposing or dismantling that premium Luard deck, because I want to still go to locals for premium when I can. So I was too lazy in order to unsleeve my Dogdas and put them in this G or Luard deck for the tournament. So I was like, okay, let me find a way where I can build a Luard deck that actually doesn't need these Dogda. And yeah, it turned out that this deck was able to do it and actually finished second place with it. So no regrets in terms of not running Dogda. Now, is this card still worth running? I'm gonna say yes, it is. There are some instances where you just want to have a slightly more threatening finisher without relying on something like Diablo or Dragstrider. And having this Dogda to go into on your Dragabyss turn when that happens is really nice to be able to do. Now, in terms of how we actually find this consistently, I do not think it's worth the sacrifice of the other fantastic grade 2s that we've got in this deck, nor the grade 1s, so that's why I just didn't feel like I had any regrets in terms of not running Dogda at all. But in terms of the players I've talked to, in terms of like how they felt about my not running Dogda after I told them this news, they were of course astonished as was expected. They found it pretty reasonable actually to not be running this card. So I feel even more confident in my decision not to be running it, and it so turned out that being a little lazy about sleeving Dogda into this deck was a good thing in terms of sparking my creative mind and finding the right pieces to make this deck possible. So but there is good reason to run this still. If you're running any normal Luard build, you need to run this, so don't slack on this card if you're going to be running a proper GR Luard build, and especially premium as well, of course. All right, and then the next card I think can be run, but I'm not considering running, is Dragwizard Gonin. Not necessarily at one copy, similar to Dogda. Of course, if you're running Dogda and Jira, you should be running 4 copies, but Gonin I think would be a 3 or 2 of. The problem with Gonin compared to Nemain, which is the card that I think is worth comparing to because they do very similar things, especially in their respective phases of the game. The reason why I picked Nemain instead of Gonin is that Nemain, as I mentioned when I talked about her on the grade 2 lineup, is a 3k card, which is extremely important, guys, for the Shiranui matchup, the Nubatama matchup, where they dominate your cards and use your own cards to attack your own Vanguard. The fact that we have this card that has less power on purpose in order to make it easier to guard our own attacks means that we're getting away scot-free pretty much, while still being able to get the draw power that's needed for running an early game card like this. And Gonin, while it does fulfill the same purpose, and it's able to do this while being a 9k card, and the whole idea behind Gonin is like, all right, it's a less risky Nemain. If I'm in a position where I have to ride Nemain, it's terrible. My opponent rushes me down, and I'm left with little to defend with. But the thing is, that is actually not common enough to warrant it being the sole reason to say, okay, I'm going to run Gonin over Nemain, because we have plenty of grade 2s in the deck where we're comfortable enough to find those grade 2s to be able to ride instead of Nemain. Basically, we're going to ride those grade 2s at all costs. We're not going to ride Nemain if possible. The problem with Gonin as well is that because it counterlasts 1 and it says specifically choose a grade 1 card ritual and discard it and then draw 2, means that it's a little problematic for some of the other pieces that we might want to discard. A lot of times I like discarding something like Slaptail Dragon, it was Morfessa during the tournament run, of course, but now that's going to be Slaptail Dragon for the future. A lot of times I would prefer to discard something like Slaptail Dragon, that way I have another grade 1 once I get to my first strides and thereafter. But I can't do that if I'm running Gonin, but on the other hand, I can do that if I have Nemain, because Nemain can discard any Shadow Paladin that's in her hand. And a lot of times I also like discarding just draw triggers that are 5k shield, because they're low shield value in our hand and we don't really need them all the time in order to use them to refill our soul. So it's fine to be able to discard that to the drop zone for the draw 2, but we're not able to do that with Gonin. So again, I feel like it's not necessary to run Gonin, but it's an option. If you think that you're okay with the Shiranui matchup being what it is, then sure, you can run Gonin instead and have a less risky grade 2 in your lineup for when you actually have to ride into something like this. But I don't think it's really worth the payoff, or I don't think it's worth the opportunity cost for those situations described. I think Nemain is just fine, and it suited me very well throughout the tournament, and it was always one of the best cards in my opening hands whenever I found it. Last but not least is Cursed Eye Raven, and I talked about this already when I was talking about some options like such as Dogda in terms of finishing and like just other trigger options in general. Cursed Eye Raven is still a very strong trigger unit in Jira, mind you. It's really one of the best stand triggers in all of the format. But the problem with Cursed Eye Raven for this exact build is that we're trying to perform a grind style, and we want those draws to help us out early game at the highest probability that we can. Having the stand trigger being seen early game is just horrible because it's not able to be used until our first stride and thereafter. Plus, we're not really in deep need of the additional retire fodder, so to speak, because that's what this card is really used for most of the time. We're not really in much need of those additional retire fodder for our skills. We're really like content with all the abilities that we have that allow us to get grade 1s on the board and build our card advantage organically with the draw triggers. So I find myself not really in need of Cursed Eye Raven. However, I do see the merit of it in that it goes back to the deck, so it's another option for recursive triggers alongside Belial Owl. And that also means that it helps make your Dragabyss turns a lot more threatening than they are for this deck, because what kind of happened, because the G boot tournaments are all best of 3 for each match, which I'll go over this, guys, when I talk about the actual report. But the fact that the matches are best of 3 means that your opponent will get a sense of how your deck is after the first game, which means that once they see once they saw that I was running 8 draws, they were like, oh, he doesn't have Cursed Eye Raven. Oh, he doesn't have Dogda. Oh, his finishing is not as good as what I've seen with other decks, so I think I'm fine. But little do they know that they're actually not fine, because we still have the alternate win conditions of decking out, and we still have strong finishers, because Luard's finishers that are available in the G zone are just inherently good. They don't need any Dogda in order to make them good. In fact, Dogda's actually not that good in terms of being paired with Diablo and Dragstrider. Of course, it's good with Dragabyss, but it's not as good with Diablo and Dragstrider, because usually those cards are self-sufficient. The only times you really want to have Dogda for those cards is to just get more bodies in the board, which, sure, I guess that's a fair enough thing. But we're also not running Semius, which gives additional rear guards when it's called on the rear guard circle. So we're not really in need of cards that give us basically more tire fodder. So that's why we're not running Cursed Eye Raven. But I would consider it, I suppose, just as a stand trigger. But perhaps a better stand trigger to run for the stand trigger purpose is Mage of the Rogue Eye Arcer. I don't have it on me right now, but basically it's a stand trigger, and what it allows you to do is, if it's retired by the ability of your card while you're at GB1, you could put it on the top of your deck and shuffle, and then I believe if you retire it for the ability of your card, then it can be counted as retiring 2 cards instead of 1. So that's nice for like Dragstrider or Diablo, which require a lot of cards to retire for their cost. So sure, that's useful for those situations, but it's not useful enough to warrant cutting out 2 of our draw triggers, which are super important, not just for refilling our soul, but also just getting that card economy built as early as we can, as highly likely as we can. And, guys, those probabilities are super important. So those 8 draws do fantastic work, and I have no regrets in those lineups. So I don't think those 2 extra stands are super helpful for the purposes I just outlined. So yeah, wow, that was a lot, guys, that we touched on, and we're not even done yet. We've got one more card to touch on that's from the G zone, and I've already talked about this, but the one plot maker that we should have been running instead of the Darkveil, there it is. There's not really much else to say though, but I just still want to point that out. All right, so we're done with the deck profile. Now let's go ahead and go over the round log. And I took a lot of notes for this because I didn't record any of the matches for the tournament, unfortunately. I'm not sure if it's allowed per rules, but I just went on the safe side and decided not to record them. But I did take a lot of notes from how the matches went, and I can go over them right here. So again, this was a tournament run by the Project Deboot Discord server. Shoutouts to them. Thanks for their running an awesome tournament. And this was my first time participating in one of their tournaments, but I assure you guys, I'm not a stranger to the Jira format. I'm not a stranger to the Jira environment, so I am quite familiar with the ecosystem and with the metagames that are existent currently, and kind of the new perspectives that have been added since then, because it's been a few years since Jira was the active format, so people kind of have different perspectives and different ideas, and I also wanted to bring some of my creative side to the table when bringing this deck to the tournament. So I did want to take every advantage I could, and I made sure to keep kind of my mouth zipped and on this build until I was finished with the tournament. But here we are, guys. So in terms of the tournament information itself, to kind of describe the the layout of the tournament, it was the people that registered, there were 10 people at the start, and a couple of them dropped, I think, due to other conflicts or having to tend to other things, or maybe they just didn't want to complete their rounds. I think one person had an error with their deck log, which is why they dropped. But the tournament started with 10 people, and there were 4 scheduled rounds of Swiss. The way these are scheduled is that they're done asynchronously. So basically, you can choose the time you arrange with your opponent whenever your availabilities coincide, and you have a certain time limit within which to complete your match. So that's the way that worked. And the tournament happens over the course of the month. It takes about 3 weeks for it to finish, which includes the top cut. We finished in about 3 weeks, so it was pretty much on time in that regard. But because people are in different time zones, it can be hard for the times to line up. So you do have to make sure to be very accommodating with your opponent. But yeah, that's kind of the way things were run. It was 4 rounds of Swiss, run asynchronously, and there was a top cut to the top 4. So after those 4 rounds of Swiss, the top 4 finishers were advanced to top cut, which was a single elimination bracket. And let me remind you guys, the matches were also best of 3, as I mentioned earlier. So the best of 3 being a thing was a huge factor. Not only did it make the matches very long, which, by the way, guys, there was no time limit at all. So I think that was certainly a big advantage that I had to use for this deck to even work in the first place, because otherwise this deck out win condition ain't gonna work ever. So the fact that there was no time limit or anything, because these are asynchronous matches, definitely went in my favor. And there's not going to be a time limit implemented as far as I understand in the near future. So we're good on that, at least. But yeah, these matches are best of 3. So the best of 3 factor is super important to keep in mind, because it's not with regards to like the siding or that aspect of it, but it's in terms of how you adjust your own deck to your opponent's deck that you've seen already. By the time that you've played the first game, you should have gathered enough information to kind of understand how your opponent wants to play their deck, and also what they have in their deck and how that can ruin your own deck, because oftentimes people don't really take those things into consideration, and then it's a best of 3 where you can actually make use of that information to your advantage to best your opponent in game 2 and 3. So oftentimes I will say that didn't actually happen, because a lot of times there were 2-0 matches. And in terms of whether best of 3 is actually significant, I do think it is. A lot of people might look at the results that I had and say, oh, best of 3 didn't really make a difference because there were a lot of 2-0s. But I personally think it made a huge difference with regards to the knowledge on the table, and like the knowledge of your opponent's deck, like how many triggers they're running, what cards they're running that can like really mess up your plans, and how to adjust your stride patterns as well, which was all things that I took advantage of. So I think it was very important in the long run to have all the things kept in mind. So yeah, with all of those kind of like preliminaries covered, let's go ahead and talk about my actual rounds. So in my first round, I played against ZTB. ZTB, for you guys that are not familiar with like G-era stuff, it's basically, it stands for Zodiac Time Beast. It's basically Gear Chronicle at its peak. Gear Chronicle didn't always have strong cards, but throughout G-era, they got slowly and slowly better support, and it all accumulated into this one archetype known as Zodiac Time Beast. These Zodiac Time Beasts basically are focused around the mechanic called Time Leap, which allows you to, after the unit, usually it's after the unit attacks, but it's not always after the unit attacks. Basically, you bind the unit in question, and you call a unit from your deck that has a grade 1 greater than the unit that was bound. So when you get this during the battle phase, it allows you to get some nasty multi-attacks. And when I say nasty, like, I'm saying it with a straight face, but guys, honestly, this is some crazy stuff for the power level of G. This is one of the strongest decks in G, and this actually was one of the strongest decks throughout a lot of G back when it was the actively supported format. So it's no surprise that people select this kind of deck for tournaments like this, which are supposed to relive the glory days of Vanguard. So Zodiac Time Beast was my matchup in the first round, and I will just say this right now, I lost 2-0. It's being the first round for this deck and my first time playing it against a real opponent as well. I had a lot of unfamiliarities with my own cards not with my own cards. I obviously know what every card in this deck does, but part of the problem was that I didn't have enough of a grasp on how to make use of these cards for this improvised grind control build. But I had to kind of just go with the flow, improvise a lot, and see what worked on the fly, basically. So a lot of game 1 was getting a feel for my opponent, getting a feel for my own deck, and making sure I can build my card advantage as my goal was, and kind of just outlast my opponent in the long run. However, something to keep in mind, guys, is that cards like Heritage Dragon are just simply insane. and very oppressive in the context of G. Heritage Dragon, basically, once you get 4 face-up G units, you can get an additional turn. And getting that additional turn is a huge deal. It's not a huge deal because of defense triggers. It's a huge deal because you're able to reset all of your attacks and still attack with your Vanguard again. And the fact that you're not able to ride is literally, who cares? Like, it's such a non-factor that honestly you have to have built a strong hand size by then, otherwise you're just dead. So all that being said, why wasn't this deck the perfect deck to counter that then? It actually was, guys, and I assure you, I was in a very strong position to win the game after I actually survived the Heritage Dragon turn. And yes, I did survive because my hand size was about 13 cards, I believe, something like that. And they're all strong cards to defend with. They were like a lot of Esras, PGs, a lot of Belial Owls, some G guards as well. So a lot of good stuff that really helped me soak some damage. And the most important part, speaking of damage, was that in order to survive the Heritage Dragon turn, this is the secret to surviving against ZTB, you have to guard a lot early. And this is something that I had to keep in mind early on, was that, all right, if I'm going to play any sort of grind game, I have to make sure not to take too much damage. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to actually pull off something like a deck out, or something like, let me go into a late game Diablo for a guaranteed finish, or a Dragstrider, which does the same or similar thing. So in order for any of that to be even possible, you have to be giving yourself enough of a cushion where you can take a lot of damage on the Heritage Dragon's turns to save yourself some trouble, because otherwise your hand size is just going to be depleted so fast. And the funny thing about Heritage Dragon is that it's at 1 copy in Project G-Boot's ban list. But once they get to those 4 face-up G units, which is not hard to do because, you know, it takes only 2 strides to get there, it becomes online, and you just have to be willing to accept your fate, that's inevitable, or you have to have already built the card economy in order to deal with it, which is what this deck was able to do. It was able to do the latter, so thankfully we were safe. But that was game 1, and actually, because the funny part about that game was that it was like the minute he noticed that I was like a grindy build, that I was running so many draw triggers, because I got a lot of draw triggers early game, he realized like, oh yeah, Heritage Dragon is actually going to be very strong then. But then I was guarding a lot early, so he was like, ah man, it's going to be tough, and I actually survived. But the problem was, I just wasn't able to get enough on hit against him on the following turn, because I went as a Dragstrider and he had enough G guards in his hand, because I wasn't putting enough pressure on him to convince him to use those heal triggers for G Guardians in prior strides. So it didn't work out that game 1. And game 2 actually went a lot better for me, but the main problem was, again, I actually died on Heritage Dragon turn because I just couldn't build up enough card advantage. I didn't. I think I actually opened Nemain both games, but I didn't get as many draw triggers the second game, and I also took some. Some damage that I didn't want to take, but then my hand quality wasn't as good. The reason why I say it was a better game was because I was closer to killing him, but I wasn't closer to living, because I still died on the Heritage Dragon turn, unfortunately. But that's how it goes, guys. That's the nature of some of these matchups, where you just gotta be willing to take the risk. Otherwise, you know, it's not gonna go super well for you. So I actually lost my first round against ZTB 2-0, and you guys might be thinking how was I able to come back from this? Like, what was the adjustment necessary to make in order to make this run possible? Well, it all starts with the buy. Okay, I'm just gonna admit this right now. It all starts with the buy. That's just the way it goes for Swiss. But my second round was a buy because I had the lowest, I guess the lowest rating or something. I don't know how it's called, but anyway, I got the buy second round. That actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I was kind of bummed at the time, because I was like, I want to play. I want to get some more hands-on experience with this deck. But that buy turned out to be very good in terms of increasing my chances of getting to the top cut, because a lot of the threats that were in round 2 suffered a loss in their game. In fact, the opponent that I faced in the first round, the ZTB player, he lost the second round match. In fact, he lost every single one of his subsequent matches. So it was pretty interesting there. Wait, no, that's not right. He won another one eventually, but I think he lost 2 of his matches in a row. Because I ended up surpassing him in the Swiss rounds in terms of the rankings. But anyway, we'll get to that. So my round 3 matchup, again, it all starts with the bye, right? My round 3 matchup, I had a real opponent paired, but my opponent unfortunately decided to drop because he couldn't find a time that worked with me in order to play our match. And that's just the nature of, you know, real life stuff. You know, asynchronous matches being is supposed to be like a nice flexibility option, and there's supposed to be enough time, you know, for the match to be scheduled in order to account for having to deal with real life situations, but it just didn't work out for my opponent. So no issue there. I was certainly again bummed, but you know, hey, it got me on the right footing. It gave me a second win that I didn't actually play. So, but those were actually super important for getting me back on my feet, because then I faced my my fourth round opponent, and guys, this was like already my ZTB opponent was like, this is the most like insane game of Giera I've played, because like he had to think so much with his stack. And that's the thing about ZTB guys. Not only are they able to do all these attacks with their Heritage Dragon and stuff, even if you live the Heritage Dragon turn, they've got their stack set up as well, because they're actually they're sending a lot of things back to the bottom of the deck and stuff. So that was what made it really hard for me to actually like finish him off, because you know I couldn't guard the subsequent turns after Heritage Dragon because the stack was so insane. But anyway, Mega Colony in round 4 was probably the grindiest. Like, okay, at the time, it was the grindiest game of Vanguard I'd ever played, because the entire best of 3 took like, I want to say, close to 2 hours. And we actually only played 2 games because it was pretty late in the night and my opponent said he had to go. So he gave me the 3rd game, but we split on the first 2 games. What happened was basically in game 1, how do I say this? In game 1, I was trying to figure out his deck, right? Because Mega Colony is a very interesting deck in Giera. It's not as weird as it is right now with just, you know, being Stride Ghidorah Turbo, and you know, just Stride Ghidorah, do your stuff that's like people call brain dead, and then just, you know, draw cards and go from there. Giera Mega Colony is a lot different. Basically, the goal is to build some card advantage and tempo, and once you get the tempo where your opponent no longer has any cards on their field, you go into Optorandus and basically just outgrind them. Eventually you'll be able to like whittle them down to nothing, because they're not able to call any cards, so they're like, I can't do anything. So that means you just go to Optorandus basically a number of turns consecutively, and because they're not able to do really much of anything, they just get a bunch of vanilla turns and you're able to finish it off from there. And it sounds like a bad match for Luard, right? Because Luard requires having rear guards in order to facilitate any, you know, profound plays. Was it as bad as it sounds? Honestly, it wasn't, because again, this deck is meant for the grind game. We're built for it. Now the problem was that, again, I had to adjust to the way he was playing his deck, the way he was playing the matchup, and what ended up happening was that I put myself in a position where I didn't have enough rear guards on my board. I had like one like Fuamnach that was sticking to the board, and he had built enough tempo for him to go into Optorandus, and from there I just like flipped over and died. Basically what happened, like I can read my notes from this as well. My main idea was like, all right, I gotta let him ride up to grade 3 first, because I feel like giving him first stride is not a good idea, and I'm still honestly not sure if that's true or not to this time. If I were to play that matchup again, I'm still a little uncertain how I'd approach it, because it's just such a weird grind game matchup. But my goal eventually was just like, yeah, I just gotta deck him out, because I'm not gonna be able to deal with this Optorandus tempo once that gets going. But you know, I guess it seemed to have been fine, basically. That was how game 1 went. Honestly, I'm gonna say this too. I gave my opponent a little too much damage. It allowed him to walk all over me with his counterblast and such, and I also took too much damage. There were a couple of times where I was like, yeah, this is a grade 1 turn, I'll take it, and then he got a crit, and that put me in a bad position, because anytime you get put in the situation where they just go Optorandus multiple turns in a row, having more damage is a lot worse than having less damage. It's similar to the Heritage Dragon concept when you face ZTB. So then we went to game 2, and I changed a lot of things by guarding early, and I managed my opponent's damage better. And Optorandus actually never came down because he never had tempo. I simply just had a lot better of a situation Knowing what the deck was like, having played it in game one, played against it in game one, and having made the adjustments. And also, of course, the big deal here was actually having Dragfall as my Vanguard instead of Dragheart. Dragheart did literally nothing. I think Dragheart's actually extremely bad in that matchup. It's only good for recycling some normals back to the deck. But Dragfall allowed me to get a lot better grip on the tempo of the game, which meant that he was never able to get a comfortable time to go into Opturandus. And yeah, I said in my notes having Dragfall as my main Vanguard the whole game certainly helped compared to game one where I was on Dragheart the whole time. But there was an unfortunate situation where neither game in that Mega Colony matchup did I open Nemain. And opening Nemain is so huge, guys. It is very important for building that early game card advantage because not only do you get an extra card in your drop zone, such as maybe a grade 1 with Ritual, but you're also getting the draw 2, which allows you to cycle a little better and make sure that you're going to see cards like this more easily because you're cycling through more cards. You're seeing more cards go through your hand. So that ended up being like I took game 2, and then as I said earlier, my opponent conceded because he had to go basically. I was like, "Are you sure? Are you sure you just don't want to play this out like a later time?" And he's like, "Yeah, I just gotta go." And then I think eventually later he's like, "I should have just played out my game 3 because then when we check the standings, I ended up finishing second in the Swiss with that win that I got against him." So it turned out that despite my having started on the wrong footing against the ZTB player, despite losing them 2-0 in fact, those buys allowed me to get back into a position where I could, thanks to the win against the Mega Colony player, actually make the top cut in second place somehow. And I actually finished above the ZTB player to whom I lost. Basically, the standings after Swiss were something like, first was a Rene player, which I faced in the final. Second was myself. Third was a Chaos Link Joker player, which we'll go over pretty soon here, guys. That was probably the most important game of the entire tournament. Probably the most pivotal point for me as well throughout the tournament. And fourth in the Swiss rounds was the ZTB player. So that was kind of what it looked like. And funny enough, that was also the final standings. So you know, interesting point there to be made. But okay, so basically for the Chaos Link Joker matchup, right? So some context here, guys. A lot of people simply just hate Link Joker, and this hate isn't any different in Giera, where you have cards that, you know, just lock you over and over. And they're not just locking your rear guards on your circles, they're making you put cards from your hand onto your circles as locked cards. So it just feels like I can see why someone would say, this feels obnoxious, man. Like, this feels like something that's just not fun or interesting. But for me, I was determined. I was like, no, I'm going to, you know, I'm going to make sure I can prove that this deck can do it. Because the minute my opponent got the locking going, I was like, yeah, I can see why this would feel like a bad matchup, but my deck is built for these situations. My deck is built to be able to outgrind in this kind of instance, so I'm going to do my best to make sure that I stick with it and, you know, pull through. And what ended up happening is that the cumulative amount of time our match took, the full best of 3 guys, and this was only 2 games, by the way, because I did win both game 1 and game 2. The full match took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Like, it was so long. And you can imagine, right, being exhausted after a long day of tournaments, after a long time of Swiss. Thankfully, this is asynchronous, because otherwise I probably would not have made it through those, even after the first game, I wouldn't have made it through, knowing that I would have had to face this Link Joker player again. And I'm actually relieved that I won game 2 as well, because, you know, winning game 1 and then having to lose game 2 to play the game 3 would have just been incredibly exhausting. So the way it went down, the minute I realized, yeah, I'm going to be locked over and over and over, I'm not going to be able to do anything, all my strides are going to be vanilla, which is what they were, because, you know, when you have locked circles, you can't call to those locked circles. So stuff like Dragabyss is a dead card. Stuff like Aurageyser can't even do anything, because a lot of times I didn't even have more than 2 open rearguard circles available to call stuff. So most of my effects were turned off, and I even at one point had only 1 open circle available. So a lot of my strides, I was just going into strides just to get some keep up some card advantage, make sure I don't get behind on that, right? But my goal was like, all right, I just got to deck out my opponent, man. I'm going to keep bottom decking these units to make sure that I just stay ahead of the game. And I'm going to keep allowing him to draw cards whenever he has an optional effect to draw, because I need to make sure that he decks out before I do. And guys, this turned out to work not just once, but twice. Like, I'm not even joking. This was the most insane game I've ever played of Vanguard. It was crazy. Like, I probably made some misplays. Like, I could have done a lot better, I think, especially in terms of how I guarded the first game. The way I guarded the first game was very poor. There were a lot of times I took damage and it was like a crit, and I was like, ah, man, I'm at 5 damage now. I gotta guard a lot of stuff. But thankfully, I got some heals that kept me back in the game. And then there was also this game too where he was about to kill me, but because he didn't pull 2 crit off of his triple drive, when his deck was 4 cards, by the way. So he had 2 crits left in his deck, and he pulled only 1 of them. So that meant his last card was a crit. If he pulled that second crit, I would have been dead. But alas, because he didn't, he basically just died to deck out because it wasn't enough power to beat me. And man, like everything had to go exactly according to plan. Like there was no room for error at that point. Everything was really down to the last minute details about the card that I had drawn off of some early game Nemains, and even the draw triggers as well, because I wasn't getting those lock circles back, you guys. I was locked like basically the entire game. Now I will say there were a lot of things I could have done better in terms of how I played the matchup. Generally speaking, I was a little greedy early game. I was trying to rush and play a lot of grade 2s in order to get some pressure on. But when you do that, the problem with that is that you allow them to start locking your rear guards from early on. And once you start locking your rear guards, you're usually going to not be able to use them again afterwards. And especially because I was calling to my front rows. Like, there was a lot of instances where I was calling double Uscias early game, because I was like, hey, this is good to prepare for some on hits to draw a card. That way I can retire some of my rear guards to prevent myself from being locked over and over. But the problem with this is the minute these 2 got locked, I no longer had any rear guards to attack with my front row, which means that I basically had just my grade 3, or not grade 3, just my Vanguard attacking multiple times in consecutive turns. And it turned out to be enough, thankfully. But you never just want to be relying on vanilla swings, so that's definitely something I could have done better in those matchups. But again, we managed to win, and thank God, because it just came down to basically just who decked out first. And thanks to my Belial Owl going back to the deck so many times, Belial Owl was a huge MVP in that matchup. Like, because of that card alone, I was able to stay basically ahead of the game in terms of being able to deck out, alongside, of course, my Dragheart, which Dragheart was my ride of choice in the matchup, and this is why, again, I feel like running this card is so important, because you want to be able to have the grind available. And sometimes Dragfall, like when I went into Dragfall, I felt like retiring his rear guards wasn't doing much of anything because his hand size was pretty big throughout most of the games that we played. But basically, I had to say to myself, all right, I don't really care about your hand size. I just want to make sure that your deck is always smaller than what mine will be at any given point in time. That way I can deck you out first before I actually lose the game to damage. So that's how that matchup went. And that was definitely the pivotal point. And I'm going to be honest, I think a lot of people, when they heard that this deck beat Chaos Link Joker, they were surprised. They were like, how did this person not win? Like, because, Link Joker is just such a hard match to deal with. But I don't know if anyone else would have been, like, I don't know if anyone else's deck would have been the deck to beat that player. So it's just an interesting way how that turned out. But then lastly, guys, the final boss in the top cut. The final, the grand final after the semifinals. This was against Shiranui Rine. And, this deck is very strong. This was one of the best decks back when Jira was the active format. But this deck is not unbeatable. I felt like actually it felt a lot more beatable than Link Joker felt at times. Because Link Joker, it felt like sometimes there was no end in sight, that I had to, just pray that he would, continue, drawing cards off of his stuff and then deck out before I would, because, Link Joker doesn't have much as far as recovering cards back to their deck in general. They have that crit trigger, which, goes back to the deck and locks one of my cards, but that's about it. So it was really just came down to, and by the way, guys, the fact that it wasn't just Belial Owl that carried in those matchups, it was also Esras. Esras was doing some drag saving, as the name says. this card was so insane in terms of keeping my card advantage up, and also making sure that I have some PGs to guard with, and keeping my deck big. Like that PG is just so good. Like there's so many cards that like together helped me get the edge in that matchup, and ended up being the reason why I was able to take it over the Link Joker player 2-0. So in the Shiranui Arena matchup, game 1 was close, but I made some terrible misplays that were costly. Basically, what happened was that against the Arena player game 1, I had literally the best opening hand I have ever had the whole tournament. I think it was something like Nemain, Dragheart, Esras, Midir, and Morfessa, something like that. It was some really good hand. And I went first as well, so it was literally best case. And I just messed up my... let me read my notes because I'm trying to figure out where I was going with this. I got Dragheart first, and I had 2 Nemains in hand. Okay, so I didn't have the Morfessa, I guess, but I had 2 Nemains. Oh no, I think I did have Morfessa in my hand, but the second Nemain came a little later. But basically, being able to go first against Shiranui is so important because you don't want them to have second stride. I know this sounds kind of counterintuitive for those of you who are kind of premium players, but giving Shiranui first stride is a lot better because you don't want Rena to already be swinging with GB3 10k power plus 1 crit to your dominate units right from the get-go. The problem with them allowing them to do that is that you just get so far behind so fast. And the reason they're able to get GB3 if they get the second stride is if they G-guard, which they pretty much, you know, the majority of the time they're able to do that if you allow them a chance to. So that being said, he did 2 consecutive Rena turns, both of which I was able to survive. You know, the first one was just the normal Rena turn without the crit. The second one had the crit because it was GB3. But then he went into Mugen Lord, and I made the terrible mistake of calling Dragfall from my hand. So basically what happens with Mugen Lord, or not Mugen Lord, like Shiranui in general. Shiranui's stride bonus, I'm not sure if it's stride bonus or on place, but it makes you basically call from your hand your rearguard circle. And the reason they want you to do this is so that they can dominate the card you called for future use. Now the problem is, I had Nemain in my hand, but I assumed he would do... I basically assumed that... I don't even know what I was thinking, to be honest. Like, I guess I just wanted to not have to... I just wanted to, like, use Nemain in a future turn, like, for its draw power. But the purpose of running Nemain in this build in the first place was for this matchup in general. Like, the Nemain is supposed to be saved for the turns like that, where, you know, you need to call a card from your hand that's going to be dominated eventually, and you want to call the lowest power card possible, such as Nemain and such as the draw triggers, which are all 4K as well. And they're 5K shield only, so you're not losing very much by calling them off of the abilities that that Shiranui has. So I called Dragfall instead of Nemain, and that was the worst mistake I'd ever made. Then it caused my Vanguard to be attacked as a stride bonus by my Dragfall, and that meant that you know, I had to guard with an additional, I think, 10k or something like that, 10k or 15k. It was just such a bad mistake, and that cost me the first game 100%. I had a lot of strong cards to guard with throughout the game, so cards like Fuki were not as big of an issue. Fuki is one of those cards that's like kind of a Yu-Gi-Oh-esque card because it's, you know, it's toxic, right? It removes one of your cards from your hand temporarily. Basically what it does is your opponent counterblasts one and puts it into their soul, and you randomly bind a card from your hand face down until the end of your turn. So basically what that's supposed to do is to snipe any heal triggers or perfect guards from your hand in order to make dealing with the dominate turns a lot harder. But the good thing about my deck is that my hand sizes are often very big, so Fuki was not as big of a deal. You know, especially considering that my hand quality was also good as well, on top of the hand size itself being good. So that was game 1, guys. I lost on the Mugen Lord turn from that terrible misplay. And then game 2 was a lot closer than game 1. He adjusted his stride pattern, you know, ever so slightly. And it was noticeable, right? Because a lot of times, you know, Shiranui players think that they can, like, kill you basically as soon as they go into the second arena, which is, you know, an understandable thing to think, right? Because Rena is such a hard card to deal with in G-Era. But the second game, he definitely noticed what my deck was all about and made the necessary adjustments. He didn't go into arenas on the second stride. He instead went to something else. But my hand was a lot worse than the first game, so I had to make do with what I had. It was a lot harder to assemble the similar situations that were given to me in the game one. But thankfully because I still went first, that first arena that he did was not as like scary or threatening as it would have been otherwise. So unfortunately, I didn't open Dragheart or Nemain, but because I had Dragfall as my first grade 3, it gave me some decent tempo. And I went into my first stride as Aurageyser instead of Dragabyss on like the first game. And going into first stride, Aurageyser gave me a lot of cards in hand to be able to hopefully do a better job. And the most important part about this Aurageyser was that I was it was so sick. Basically, this Aurageyser hit double Esras, like not even joking. Like, so Aurageyser, when you reveal the top 2 cards of your deck, you add them to your hand no matter what. But if they're grade 1s, then it gets +5 for each one, right? But hitting both PGs was just insane, because that basically gave me like the best defensive hand to deal with his cards for the rest of the game. It was so good. And accordingly, he decided to stride into this card that forces me to keep 4 of my cards in my hand and bind the rest, because he felt threatened by the fact that I had like 14 cards, 15 cards in my hand after the first stride. I think it was 14 or something like that. But that turned out to be kind of a wasted turn for him, I think, because I was already at low cards in my damage zone, so I could just easily take the attacks that he was doing, and it was no problem at all. In fact, he put me at 4 damage, I think, but it didn't feel like I was in a bad position at all. And the fact that I was getting all those cards that I bound back to my hand at the end of the turn anyway meant that we were in a pretty safe position. So yeah, I wrote in my notes here, since I had only 1 damage when he went into that stride, I was chilling. The nice thing about this deck having all those counter charges is that we don't need to take very much damage, guys. I already said this before. One of the things that differentiates like how players play any deck in G-Era, especially Luard though, compared to playing in a premium, is that you really do not need that much damage to work with, because of the counter charges, because of the ways that we can make use of counter blast efficiently, and because we have so many things that just soul blast instead anyway. Cards like Dragabyss just soul blast, and you can eventually recover the soul eventually with cards like Vicreau or the draw triggers effects. But it's good to make sure just to keep in mind that you don't need to take a lot of damage in order to actually play the game. So looking at this as well, basically I was about to finish him. Oh yeah, okay, I remember this now. So I was about to finish my arena opponent off with the Diablo turn, and it was a perfect setup. I think I mentioned this already, guys, but basically my Diablo had 53k power. It was boosted by a Fuamnach, and it also got an additional 3k from my draw triggers put into soul effect. And in hindsight, had I put another one of those draw triggers into the soul for another 3k, it would have put my Diablo at 56k, and I think he would have not been able to guard that, because he had to guard 1. He ended up only guarding 1 to pass for the 53k Diablo with 2 of his G Guardians. And unfortunately for me, I did not pull any triggers, so that 1 to pass was that was basically the end of the game. That was my last chance of trying to kill him. That was my last hope. And my deck was very small at that point, so it felt especially bad. It felt like I did everything that I was supposed to, but just not getting a trigger was just so unfortunate. I knew my deck was very compressed at that point, and it just didn't work out, guys. I survived the next turn by the skin of my teeth when he went into Luard. Thankfully, I didn't have a lot of rear guards on my field, so it was a lot better of a situation. And of course, the fact that I went into Diablo the prior turn definitely helped, because that meant that a lot of my rear guards were retired from the previous turn anyway. So I wasn't going to be leaving a lot of rear guards in the field. But on the following turn, after I survived the Luard turn, I don't know why, but I was like spooked out of my mind, and I was scared what he would have had in his hand, even though I should have known most of his hand by then, because a lot of the cards he had in his hand were just cards he drove check at that point. But if I had gone into Dragstrider, I would have finished him off, and we would have gone to game 3. But for some reason in my mind, I was like, man, I'm kind of afraid of some 10k shields or G Guardians or whatever. So instead I went into Dragabyss, and turned out he had a bunch of PGs in his hand. And those PGs I honestly did not know about. He didn't drive check any of them. so I guess that made sense, right? But you know, if I had gone into Dragstrider, those PGs would have been invalidated, and I would have probably won that game. But instead, I went to Dragabyss. He was able to comfortably PG basically every attack, and it was over. I lost the following turn. Knowing that I didn't have any heals left in my deck, I just conceded, and the victor of the tournament was the Shiranui player. So overall, guys, it was a good first stint for this deck. I mean, considering that I do not think this is by any means the best build that I could have possibly used of Luard for this tournament, and it still did this well, and these adjustments I think can still bring it up a notch. This did pretty well, I'm going to be real. And I didn't test it a lot either, so there's a lot that can be said about that as well. The nice thing about Luard, I think especially about Jira, you know, kind of to give my closing thoughts, is that I feel like it's actually a very interesting deck in Jira. People kind of meme on it because, you know, it's like, yeah, just Morfessa go burr in Premium right now, which is very much true. I mean, it's part of Bushiroad's design philosophy nowadays to make these insane strides, just, you know, help new players get into the game by just merely upgrading their V decks. But I feel like that philosophy really just hurt the game in the long run. It made a lot of the strategies become less interesting. Like Luard is now devolved into a Morfessa Turbo deck. You have other decks that are just doing equally uninteresting things. But meanwhile, in Jira cards, Jira formats, you have decks like this that are available that allow you to do so many cool things with the clan, with the format, with the cards, with all the interactions that are available, with how the ways you can interact with your opponent and adjust their matchups. Like, it's so fun, it's so insane. And I just really loved the run that was able to be assembled with this deck. I really enjoyed the tournament as well, meeting the people that I did. It's having been the first time. You know, I didn't know what to expect, but in the end, I'm very happy that it performed as well as it did. And knowing that there's these changes that I know I would make already to the deck, it makes me even more happy about that. So, yeah, guys, that is going to do it for the video. That was 2 hours long. If you guys somehow made it to the end of this video, man, you know, I'm just gonna give a clap for you, because, like, you know, I do not know how a lot of people will be able to survive through this 2 hours of just me rambling about Luard and Jira. I sound like, you know, an old man that's stuck in the past, but I really had a lot of fun with this deck, and I hope you guys were able to enjoy my talking about it for 2 hours straight. But even if you didn't, I hope you were able to enjoy the part that you did watch of it, even if you skipped to the end like most of you probably would. But regardless, guys, yeah, that's going to do it for the deck. If you enjoyed the video, please do feel free to leave a like and a comment and subscribe for more Vanguard content. I've got a lot of videos coming soon, mostly related to deck reports for some other decks that I've been working on, as well as some deck profiles for just, you know, some auxiliary decks that I haven't really been using at tournaments necessarily, but have been long overdue for a deck profile proper. So those will be coming out, you know, over the next couple of days. Of course, give me some time to work on those, though. I've got a lot of things to still finalize with editing and publishing and all of that, so give me some time on those. But if you look forward to those, please do feel free to subscribe as well. It really helps the channel out, guys, and I really appreciate everything that you guys have done to support the channel. And yeah, I'll hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching, guys.